Good evening to Chris, good morning to Scott, and good afternoon to Eddie. We are the replacement team for Ranzie's usual Saturday show. Welcome.
My fault. Sorry. How is it going? Everybody.
Hi,
okay?
everyone.
Hi. Today we are, of course, going to talk about all of you. But first I have to say, Lisa Inky the cat was supposed to be on. She may make it later if she can, but she had some trouble with her gear. I did invite Scott, so there were two good-looking people on the stream, but now you have to... it's enough with us. There's nothing to do about it.
Nice symmetry. Do not. Do yes. Oh, well, sorry. Do with.
Yeah.
Do without.
Yeah, Snapchat filter.
Yeah. So welcome,
Hey.
and in the chat we have Keith, we have David, and that's about it, I think, until now. But it will grow, I'm sure.
Makeshifter's there.
Yeah.
Multitasking.
Oh, you lucky chap.
I can't do that. I get in trouble each time I try.
So yeah.
Okay.
But-
Ranzee will be back next week, so this is the last replacement show for this time, and it has been fun doing them, and it wasn't that hard because I chose to ask for people's backgrounds, and everybody loves to talk about themselves, so it's so easy to do such a show. So should we start with Chris? What is your background?
Well, I have to refer to my notes so I can remember how it all started. No, my background very much started in just being a music fan growing up. I was exposed to a lot of electronic music because it was the 80s, man. I mean, basically that was what was going down. So I got pretty interested in electronic music in really, really early days. I just didn't know what it was. My sisters, I have two older sisters, and they were very much influenced me because, of course, you get to, it's their record collection you originally start hearing stuff about. And so, I mean, we had just stuff like Saturday Night Fever, and we had War of the Worlds soundtrack, and stuff like that. So I heard all sorts of that stuff originally. I just didn't really know it was any different from any other music. It wasn't until later that I realized that it was made with synthesizers, something that was completely new to me. And I didn't know it about electronics. I was just a kid, so it was just something I was quite interested in, and that influenced my interests growing up until I could afford, buy my own records. And of course, the first record I got was one of those one of those compos, Hits 85 or something like that. And that had seminal stuff on it, like it had Depeche Mode, it had Gary Newman, it had Visage, it had Fade to Grey, it had a few other things, trying to think what else other things it had. Anyway, it had that great 80s kind of 80s music, synth pop, which that pretty much molded me, I think, because I've still always been sort of in love with that sort of side of things ever since. And you kind of just what you experience when you're growing up seems to really affect you. Anyway, after that, it was my sisters were getting into more stuff like we got through Duran Duran and all of that kind of 80s stuff. It was the first sort of proper album I ever, realized that an album, you could put all these songs together, and it was kind of an experience. And then they got into more interesting stuff, different stuff like The Cure, I think we're trying to think of some of the other Japan. They listened to Japan, really different stuff that I can't necessarily remember, but it all sort of influenced me. And it was just always going on in the house. So, and I always found all music interesting. So I was never like, the person to come along and say, oh, I hate that song, turn it down, I hate this stuff. I was never the kind of person to dictate to other people what music they liked. I just seemed to abide everything. So that's why I'm not sort of super passionate about one kind of music. I have affinity with different kinds of music, but I'm not like blocked off to those kind of sounds, which comes in handy later on in life, which I'll get to. So after the 80s, growing up, high school, good mates, we all kind of got into dance music. We got into Italo disco. We got into Euro disco. Then, of course, it evolved into we had Detroit techno and all this kind of stuff started coming on in the 90s. Was becoming more mainstream. The techno was sort of there. The house was starting to come into it. Well, getting into it, and I was in leaving high school then, and it was going to uni, so I had to start. Is that the stage that I started getting involved in computers and stuff like that? Before that, just rewinding a bit, electronics, I haven't mentioned. I've always been into electronics. Since I was a kid, I used to tinker with a soldering iron. I used to build the little electronic kits that you get from an Australian company here called Dick Smith, which is no longer with us, but they were sort of like our one-stop sort of DIY electronics store. So I was making kits and stuff like that way ago, and those kind of loves you don't seem to ever seem to grow out of. You just sort of ebb and flow. Anyway, coming back to the 90s, I had to decide what I was going to do with my career, what I was going to do for a job. I found I had the affinity with computers, so I went down that direction. I was terrible at maths, which was a bit of a complication because it was difficult to get into university without having good maths. So I ended up taking an extra year because I had to take bridging courses, but that got me into computing science, which I did at Curtin University. At the same time as that, I haven't mentioned it, but I actually forgot the music side of it. Drums. So I was originally a drummer. Banging skins was my thing. Synths was always there in the background, but the drums was kind of what I was able to sort of pursue. I didn't really have the funds for synths, and I didn't really have the knowledge at the time, but I could play drums. So that was sort of, and that there was an avenue for that kind of stuff at high school. So I was in the school band and all that kind of stuff. That got me into music. So I did actually do music at high school. So I did my classical, I did my Stockhouse, and did my 12-tone system. So I got my education in that. However, I was never a keyboard player. So these hands are really made for banging, not really for playing.
Why do they call it 12-tone system when it's only 11?
Good point.
Good point. I really honestly don't know. But okay. I think it's not... Anyway, I get the joke. Yeah, anyway, so as I was saying, I've never been a great keyboard player, so but I get by. So and I can't read music very well. I could read percussion music layout well enough to pass my high school music class to get, and then I got into uni. And in uni, I did computing science, as I said. Around about the same time, my friends went on slightly different paths. My best friend, he went on to do film school. And my other best friend, he went on to do journalism. Eclectic mix of people we are. But we never sort of lost touch, and we kept on meeting because we liked doing music together. So that's where the sort of the collaborative sort of side and the actual sort of, you know, being a proper music production process started for me. Was basically being sort of encouraged by people around me to sort of to join them, and sort of enthusiasm of some people, you know, deficiencies in one areas. I was always the guy who knew the technology, so that kind of was my way into it. But I was also, it turned out, I was also the one with the most the ear, I think, for the actual melodic side of things. But my other friend, who was really, really good at the sort of he had the golden ears. So he was always the guy who did our mastering and most of our mixing. I was quite far behind in that area because I was much more into I was definitely the guy who could come up with chords and stuff like that. So I was never sort of the front man. I can't sing, although I have sung, but it was never really sort of the thing that I was known for. Anyway, in university, because my friend was going to film school, I started scoring student music productions for film scores. And that's how I got involved in that side of thing. I got a taste of that, which was quite a fun experience. But it wasn't really synth music at that time because I was very much called on to do more sort of traditional orchestral type stuff. So that was what was, you know, called for in the scripts and stuff like that. And I don't think I really had the self-confidence to really understand how to reinterpret and reframe that kind of, you know, request for music into something that you can play back to them and they go, oh, I didn't think of that, but that's exactly what I wanted. That came later. So after doing a couple of years of university, I got my degree and I got my first job, which I'm still with, unbelievably. Working for the same company for over 15 years. Small company. I'm a computer programmer by trade. I'm a software engineer by name. Basically, I'm the guy who likes to get my hands dirty in the code. But of course, I'm paid according to being the title of software engineer. So I also take on the roles of architecture and sort of system design and stuff like that. Just expanded out into that area. But I've to this day, I'm still a total nerd when it comes to coding, and I just can lose myself for hours doing coding. So that's the nerd side of things. When it comes to the music, I was involved in getting hardware synths from the 90s onwards, late 80s, 90s. That was really before computers were capable of doing much music. So it was all hardware. That's when I got my SQ1. That's when I got my Poly 800. It was very quickly that I realized that I couldn't emulate all of the music I was hearing with those two keyboards. And it's still to this day, there's a few things that I can't emulate because I, for example, don't have a DX7. And it turns out that a lot of the music I was listening to was the bass lines were done with DX7s. Now, that was something I didn't quite understand. I did get very close with the TX81Z, but the difference between 4 operator and 7 operators turned out to be a pretty big difference. And also the other thing I didn't appreciate, of course, is the power of a large studio. Something that we're very lucky that we can now use plugins and we've got really good DAWs that we can get access to all this sort of emulation of hardware and sort of ethos and sort of way of working of a big studio in the 80s and 90s that most of us just weren't really aware of because we weren't part of that world. And that part of that world seemed to be a little bit closed off to the public. Obviously, magazines, your Sound on Sound, Future Music, this started opening the doors on understanding these things. And of course, that's when I got my education on, you know, what more is out there. The first recording studio I ever got into was a studio here called School of Audio Engineering. And that was the first time I saw a 16-track tape recorder and such things. So that was a bit of an education, large consoles and all that kind of stuff. But I still have the hardware. The hardware is growing, but not at a great rate. Then computers started coming into it. I was mucking about with computers. I had a PC in the early stages with a Creative Labs Sound Blaster card, and that led me to do things like I created my own sampler but it didn't use MIDI because I didn't know about MIDI. Well, I did know about MIDI, but I didn't have all the right equipment for converting MIDI on the Creative Labs Sound Blaster. I didn't have the little cable or something. Anyway, I did something really kooky. I made a sort of tone to note detector piece of software that actually converted it into. So there was this clunky sampler that we were using to get sort of, real 8-bit, and it was all sort of, cobbled together, and it was coming out. It was just a sine wave coming out of one of my keyboards, triggering this thing. So I'm no stranger to jury rigging things, and that's kind of partly an aspect of my sort of tinkering, hacking type attitude, which partly affects why my moniker Makeshifter is the way it is, because I've never been too serious about being super professional about everything. That's not to say I don't strive for it, but I had a little bit of a sense of humor. I don't take myself too seriously, I hope. So I'm quite happy to do some sort of kooky stuff every now and then with jury rigging and stuff like that. So I'm not a snob in that sense. That's why I generally get along with most people into music, whatever levels they're at or knowledge they're at. I can usually seem to get along with most people, which is really handy. So that's after the 90s, we're into the noughties, and we were still making music together. The music we were making then under the name was GAS. A little bit later on, we had an interesting episode with a radio station here in Australia called Triple J. This radio station here was an independent radio station. It was an alternative youth style sort of youth station. And they had a project they called, or a sort of competition they called, Unearthed. They have something much bigger now. They have a whole website dedicated to it. But back then, this was in its infancy. And what they used to do with that is they used to try and discover new talent, and they just used to take submissions, demos, that kind of thing, in a search for in each state in Australia. And the idea was that they take their music, they'd announce them, they'd bring them onto the program, they'd bring us into their studio. They had ABC studios, record their song and put it on a compilation, which was they had every year, which was called The Unearthed, Triple J Unearthed, that year. We submitted 2 songs to that out of a joke. One of them was definitely a joke, and one of them was a bit more serious. One of the tracks was sort of Depeche Mode, sort of influence type stuff that we were sort of more serious about. And the other thing was the completely jokey track with a huge sample, a famous sample in it, which will come back to haunt me in a moment. And just really fun. It was drum and bass. It was kooky. It was like a novelty song, and we just did it for fun. Anyway, we won. So that was unexpected. And so we were like, okay, what do we do now? So we went through the process. I'll just take a break for a moment because my mouth's getting dry. Sorry, I'm just trying to relay it all. Probably too much of a story. I hope I'm not boring people too much. Or if I'm talking too fast, sometimes there's the other thing that happens. Anyway, so we won Triple J Unearthed. Now, everything went pretty smoothly to begin with. We went into a recording studio. That was great fun. We had, it was the first time we'd seen a really big desk, and this engineer, she was doing the whole engineering. She'd come over from the eastern states of Australia. She was using all outboard equipment that we'd heard of but never seen in the flesh. We had Aphex oral exciters and things like that going through. We hauled in all our gear. I packed it into the back of my Datsun 180B, We hauled it into Perth Central and hauled it up the stairs because it was upstairs, unfortunately. And anyway, we had a list going and we did this recording and she mixed it down and we did it all in the day. And then we left and that was, really great fun. And, it was worth it just to do that, and we got the recording, we were allowed to have it and they were allowed, and obviously they had the rights to use it and put it on a certain, on their sort of compilation. Then a couple of weeks later, we get an email from their legal department saying, what about this sample you've got in there? And that's when we said, yeah, we did tell you about that, but you didn't seem to really understand what we're talking about. It's a sample from Henry Mancini, Baby Elephant Walk. Now, at the time, we were thinking, maybe it works, maybe we don't. We don't know what their process is with samples. It was in the early days. They hadn't really done a lot of that kind of electronic music. They didn't really know, I'm sure. Anyway, they're all very positive and optimistic. And they said, oh, you need to write to the estate and get clearance for that sample. And so we went, okay, no worries. So that's what we did. We wrote and we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited. And then we finally got a reply back from Henry Mancini's estate. And they said, yeah, no worries. You can do that. We're not got no problem with you using that sample. We'll just need $50,000 up front. And we went, and looked at the radio station and they said, are you going to do something about that? Are you going to do something about that? And it all very quickly degenerated into people not talking to each other anymore and giving everyone the silent treatment. We realized pretty quickly what was going to happen. Sure enough, they acted as if it had never happened and that we had never won the competition. And the funny thing is that they were playing this for a couple of weeks on the radio before this happened. And then they just acted as if, what are you talking about? We weren't talking about that. They must have been they were getting requests to play this and they must have been having to just ignore the requests. It was awkward for us. It was awkward for them. Anyway, water under the bridge. We got over it. But it is a funny story to tell because it is one of those things where they obviously worked out they needed to get copyright clearance before they recorded a darn thing in future. And they must have put rules into the competition after that about you must have pre-cleared samples or something like that. Anyway, we knew we were the first, so we just thought, well. And it was a joke song anyway. We had fun. It gave us a taste for it. We decided to take it further and actually create an album of the same style, which we made, and we actually did get it pressed. And if I can find it here, I'll just, because it is quite a fun piece of artwork. Let's grab it. This is people in the 90s will probably appreciate the artwork on this one. That is yes. So that is yes. Too many. A bit of a nerdgasm going on there. C colon, happy smiley face, acid house, all that kind of stuff. We did produce it, 500 copies. The same, thing everyone does these days, but back then it was a bit of a novelty. We had to get the artwork done, and we went through the whole process, and we sold a few copies, we gave away a lot of copies. We didn't care, we just enjoyed doing the process, and we just enjoyed the fun of sort of our friendship together. And as I said, once you're on a journey, you kind of just follow it through. Anyway, so we did after that. Fun fact, 5 years after that, after having a box full of these CDs, not in cases, we didn't have the heart to fill all the cases with them ourselves after that. We actually gave them to a primary school, and they hung them in the roof of all of their classrooms as sort of spinning decoration. And it's a bit of a sad way to end in one sense, but we actually kind of liked it. So yeah, So I've never taken this music business thing terribly seriously. So if I offend anyone who's really trying to get their stuff out there, there might be a little bit of derogatory comments from me, but I mean it only in jest and all in fun. I've been told that having a sense of humor in music production is actually a handy thing, so I think I believe them. Anyway, so after that thing, we're still making music together. We made a few more tracks. We just kept on meeting up, kept on doing that. I was doing some other music by myself as well. A few other projects, working with other people. A few of this music I've got on my SoundCloud page, which I might come to later. Some old stuff. But the next thing that happened really was the getting into film music again, because after that I got quite into actual filmmaking per se, because my siblings really got into filmmaking, and we were making sort of jokey films together and shorts and stuff like this. And it got a bit more serious, and we decided that we were going to make an amateur independent film. Quite a big decision to make, but we decided to do it nonetheless. And of course, it was going to have to be DIY. We were going to have to do it all ourselves. So, of course, I was put up my hand to do the music and to do the sound recording and to do the sound mix and to do the sound editing and to do the Atmos and all the dialogue editing, and you get the idea. So I pretty much decided to do all the sound on this feature film, which was a pretty big job in the end. And the film was called By Any Other Name, as in a rose by any other name. And it was I could show more about it because I have some clips if we want to show them with the music, mostly with some of the music behind that I had in it, which might explain the film a little bit more. The genre of it is anyway. It's kind of a noir type, future noir type thing. It's not sci-fi, but it is sort of modern noir. So it had kind of a moody soundtrack. Again, it was mostly orchestral stuff. Again, because that was what the director was calling for, and that's what they're familiar with. We also had some contemporary songs in the track because the main character in the film was a singer, and she sang at a kind of a jazz fusion club. So I was making different tracks for the film, and that's where I wrote some more tracks, which I'll be able to put one or at least one of them on the SoundCloud page today, which you might find interesting because it's a bit of a trip hop type track. But I was also doing some sort of passable jazz and stuff like that. So kind of jack of all trades type stuff. But that was kind of my area of I could kind of pivot to doing different things. None of them well, but passably. Certainly enough for this kind of production. I'm pretty proud of the orchestral score that I did for this. There was really not a lot of synth in it, I have to admit. It was all done with Garriton Personal Orchestra and my NS5R, Korg NS5R. There's a little bit of synth stuff in one of the tracks, which is one of the tracks I put up on SoundCloud, which you might find a bit more interesting because that's a bit more contemporary and a bit less obviously orchestral, which these days people can do a lot better, I'm sure. But anyway, that was quite a long project. I did quite a bit of minutes of music for that film. And after that, I was pretty much worn out. So music wasn't for me for a couple of years. I also had some mental health issues to deal with. And so synths and music and stuff like that took a bit of a back seat. So a couple of years later, things are getting better, and I'm starting to I still never dropped my Future Music magazine subscription. So there's a little vote for Future Music. And I still never stopped listening to music, particularly dance music. That was kind of my passion. So that was sort of what I was what I was listening to, and that's probably what you'll find I do mostly these days, because that's sort of what I'm interested in. So a couple of years pass, and Electro House and Dead Mouse comes on the scene, and trance techno house is starting to take off, and I'm starting to think, I might start getting into this again. So it's computer time, DAWs, software synths, not so much into hardware. It was sort of that computer realm. So that's where I started really getting into DAW and music production, digital music production. And that really was for 3 or 4 years, 100% what I was doing things as. And with all of my hardware was relegated to what I called the museum, which is just me keeping the dust of things, but basically storing it somewhere. I had very understanding parents, which helped let me store all my gear there. So I didn't sell it because I don't like selling things. I have an aversion to selling or getting rid of most things, because I'm always thinking, but what if I want to use it again? So that's why I hoarded all my gear, my old gear especially. So DAW music production was what I was into for quite some years. And I got to a point where I started submitting demos to Future Music Magazine, because I just thought it'd be fun. Same sort of things. What the heck? I got a demo of the month. In pretty much the last demo of the month they ever did in Future Music Magazine. It was pretty much that or one-ish after that they dropped the whole segment from the magazine. This was when SoundCloud was finally taking off, and demos were like, demos? Why would you have a magazine with demos in them when everyone can go online and listen to everyone's demos? And that was when that was all changing. So the dawn of self-published music, and in the beginning, not really the beginning stream, but the beginning of self-published music and independent music artists publishing their own music online was just beginning. The dawn of the new age. But so that was pretty much and a bit of an encouragement there about getting that track. That track is also up on my SoundCloud page, which I'll give you a link to in a moment. But that sort of got me back into the sort of thought of doing music again. So after that, it was paying a bit more attention to what was in the magazines, and a bit more software. Then the hardware stuff started coming along, and the hardware revival and the analog hardware revival. And I was starting to get the pangs again to go hardware. So that's around about the same time is when I started rekindling or reconnecting with my electronics hobby, because Eurorack was beginning as well. So that's when everything started exploding a bit, and I honestly can't remember the exact order in which everything goes from here, because to me this is recent history, but it's actually been almost 8 years, I think, that I've been stepping back and forth from all these different things. But so this is when I started learning about analog circuitry and analog circuits. I actually had a friend back in the 90s who was trying to explain this to me back then, and I didn't get it, but fortunately now I do. And it was a bit of a revelation when I did. But so that's when I started building things in the modular synth sort of world and the modular synth format. This is when things like the Volcas were coming out. So I was getting Volcas because, they're cheap and they did analog stuff, and it was really cool. And I was finding, these sounds are cool, but why isn't there a rim shot? I really want that rim shot sound. And why isn't there a such and such? I really want that sound. And that's when I started going, there's circuits. People have been starting to emulate these drums. I wonder if I can get the circuit diagrams and start understanding them and researching them and service manuals and all that kind of stuff. And that's when I went on the deep dive down into drum synthesis circuits. And I was in that hole for quite a few years as I was developing some of the stuff which I'll be featuring on my YouTube channel as individual modules that I've made over the last couple of years in that genre of analog percussion, stuff like that, which was made out of that sort of need to fill a gap between what was available and what I thought I was capable of doing. At that stage, I didn't fully understand modular. I thought it was a good idea, and it's kind of coming back now. I thought it was a good idea I'll stay away from drum triggers because they were kind of complicated and you needed special sequences, and I don't want to do all that. And anyway, my Korg Volca doesn't have trigger outputs. I should do MIDI. I know microcontrollers and stuff like this. I'm going to do MIDI. So I made the decision to make all of my first Euroact modules MIDI driven, which sounds cool until you realize what I actually did was have one module which had the MIDI in it and lots of connectors going behind the panel to all the other modules to do the drum triggers. Nothing was coming out on the front panel. Now, this is something I didn't truly understand then, and it wasn't really what I was into. I didn't really fully understand the whole modular world. I wasn't really engaged in it yet. So that didn't come till later. But then it was still pretty much the same thing that you get now, but it was just, I just didn't have the concept of the patchability, completely keeping everything within the modular world. Didn't quite understand that yet. So that's kind of part of the reason why you haven't seen these modules from me before, because they've kind of been in the shelf because I can't really integrate them yet into my modular rig. But the experience of drum synthesis and understanding came handy when going back into software. I got into this technology called Patchbox. Now, these were, I've probably got them down here somewhere, the little blocks that you plug together with the little knobs on them, and they had a little ARM processor on them. I think it was an ARM3 Cortex. And that you could program them with very similar to pure data, but it was a bit more visual. And this was when I was mucking about with that, and I was finding that there was a community online of people who wanted to make electronic music with these things. And that's when I first getting back into the sort of internet community side of things, because up until that point in time, I had pretty much not really been into that. I'd not really gotten into the IRC, the chatting. I'd not really got into most of the internet and the sort of social side of things. I wasn't on Facebook. All of this stuff was sort of not part of the world I was in. So that's why if I seem a little green, it's because I wasn't really part of that whole sort of evolution of musicians and electronics musicians talking to each other via the internet. I didn't get involved in that, which is odd, I know, but that's why my experience is a little bit different. And that's why all of this that's happening now is kind of new to me. It's fresh for me, despite my age. So I sort of come into it sometimes with the same sort of eyes as a lot younger people who've grown up with this stuff and technology, and it's sort of natural to them. But to me, it's sort of this side of it is new, but the synth side of it is old. So it's a weird combination anyway. But anyway, so I was into Patchbox, and I was into developing code for that, because the way you program Patchbox is that you had all these pre-built blocks that you could use, but there was a lot of functionality that was missing. And I found that I could program the languages. I could program in C, which meant I could do these custom blocks, and people were using these custom blocks, and it's kind of got addictive after a while. And I started creating patches, creating blocks, and people were using them. And one of the things I was doing was doing drum synthesis blocks. So I was doing a block that was a kick drum synthesizer, which is one of the first things you'll find on my YouTube page, because that was one of the first things that sort of was worth putting on a YouTube page. That sort of got me to actually create that YouTube page, because I had something to share. And of course, I was still interested in sort of movies and stuff like that, but I was so burnt out from the last movie that I really didn't want to get into editing and all this kind of stuff. So I wasn't really seriously committed to that. But, you know, smartphones came along and you could shoot things on smartphones really easy, and YouTube became the thing where you could do that, and it seemed like a logical progression, and people quite happy to sort of, you know, have these blocks explained, this kick drum block. And I also did a a 909 type block. Around this time, Patch Blocks, the company, started to go very quiet. They had a new project called the Mini Jams, and they were focusing on this, and the Patch Blocks was taking a distant second. I was involved in the Kickstarter campaign for these Mini Jams because I wanted to support the company. They were basically this was a company based in Ireland. It was a guy from Ireland who actually worked in Ireland, but he actually had a German name, so I was suspicious whether he was German and emigrated. Anyway, so they were trying to do this thing with really small, portable, battery-powered synths that were very, very inexpensive. Everyone's holy grail these days, making inexpensive things that people can use. This was in the early days of that, so people could see the potential and people could see that something could be created. However, this was the infancy, so the things that they all must have been running up against were CPU performance and DAC resolution. In the end, this was a bit of a failure for them, I think, financially, and they ended up selling the whole company and closing down the whole Patch Blocks thing. So all of us left with these Patch Blocks, we had an end of life situation. So that was a bit of a blow at the time, because where else were we going to go with this, and there wasn't anything else out there like that. Since then, there have been a lot of other things that come along. And for example, at the moment, I'm working with the Befico Lich, which is something that Hendrik very kindly put me onto, which is pretty much the evolution of something like a patch block. It's basically DSP that you can program in C or in pure data. You can create your own patches using DSP type functions and DSP like attitudes and design at high resolution. So 24-bit, 44.1 kilohertz or 48, I think this one is. This was unheard of back when I was doing patch blocks. So all the software I developed for then sort of was ahead of its time, I guess. Anyway, the timing wasn't great for me anyway, because it would have been nice if I could have done it with that technology back then, but it wasn't available. So after that, I was still making music, but it was a bit more internal. I wasn't really publishing anything. I had my SoundCloud page, but I didn't really put anything new on it. I had one project which I did for what became the evolution of this Triple J radio station Unearthed competition, which was a website where they had it was a bit like a SoundCloud, but for just for artists on that were part of this radio station or submitted, and the radio station would play this stuff on their radio station.
Should we take a break and continue with you a little later, because Scott is up early and we want to keep him awake. So he's doing something too. But you have a very interesting story, and I want to know much more. So it's not to cut you off; it's just to take a break.
No, that's exactly the right time.
Good. Okay, Scott. We have met you before, so
yes.
So we know a little about your hearing, your DJ time, and all that stuff. But how did you start with music?
Well, I'll tell you, before, I have been chatting over here, and I know a couple of people started talking about DX7s when Chris talked about trying to find his and I know the bass you're talking about. I think it's Lately bass. Is that the one? Probably.
Sorry, I just unmute. No, actually it wasn't. I know what you're talking about, because the Lately bass is on the TX81Z. No, it was actually I used to call them the Farina bass, because it was made by a producer called, I think, Mike Farina. He was an Italian. It was part of the Italo disco scene, and they basically made these really woody type basses on the music I was listening to. Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Talking about on there. The Modiax or Montage will actually load DX7 patches right into it, and it has an FM engine in it. The Op6 somewhere right there. will also load DX7 patches and play them. So there are options to having a DX7. So yeah, I've been around music pretty much my entire life. I came up, grew up in the 70s, playing piano, Royal Conservatory music, piano, sang music, recorder, trombone, lots of music throughout my entire life. I was a little bit of an odd kid because I wasn't listening to what the other kids were listening to. I would come home and I would listen to classical music because that's what I loved. I would come home and put on the headphones and listen to the classical radio station in the evenings as I was doing homework. But then one night I was just tuning around. I was laying in bed and had a little radio because I've always loved radio, and I was tuning around in the radio and I heard this song. I'm like, what is that? And it was something I'd never heard before. It sounds I'd never heard before. And it was Gary Newman, Cars. And I was just transformed by this. And that was my introduction both to synthesizers and also to a radio station in the Toronto area called CFNY, which was pretty much the only outlet for that type of music. They came up playing punk, and then they kind of, as punk kind of evolved into new wave and Blondie and that sort of thing, they started playing that as well. But they would still play ELO. But that was another big love of mine because it had the classical strings and everything, but started moving electronics in there as well. So that was really what kind of yanked me from where I had grown up into this new world of synthesizer music. And I just went whole hog into it. That's all I wanted to hear was synthesizer music. And very much like Chris, I started listening to, it was Depeche Mode, it was Visage and Ultravox and Brian Eno and anything that has synthesizers, I just couldn't get enough of. And that's actually what led to my involvement in the DJ world, is because at this point I'm in high school, and these old men they brought in as the DJs to play our dances were playing top 40 music and some 70s rock, classic rock. And it's not what the kids wanted to hear, because we had this radio station called, the CFNY station that was playing all this electronic music and all the imports from Britain, and nobody else was playing that, and certainly not the DJs they were bringing in. So I said, well, if they're not going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And so we scraped together little bits of equipment and begged, borrowed, stole what we could to build speaker systems and started running our own dances to play the music that we wanted to hear. And it exploded. It took off that way. And that's kind of how I started thinking, well, maybe I could do this kind of music as well. And at first, of course, you can't afford to buy this stuff, so we would rent it. So we would have a dance, and we would rent some drum machines and a sampler or something, just a few days ahead, so we could get to use it and get familiar with it. And then we actually start using it during the DJ set. And I remember it was like the fascination and the thrill the first time I mixed out of a song into a drum machine, and I was just sitting back there and I had to laugh because I was looking at all these people that were dancing to my drum machine, and I thought that was the greatest thing ever. And they had no idea that they weren't listening to a record that I was playing, and I was really hooked by that. And later, when I had moved into Toronto and I started working large dance clubs and that sort of thing, I started I had a little bit more liquidity that I could actually think about purchasing some things. And so I went into the Long McQuaid music store that every musician in Toronto has been in debt to at some time or another, and put a down payment plan on a Korg Poly 6, which not the same one, but it is a Poly 6 down in the right corner there. That was my very first synthesizer, and shortly after that was followed by an Ensoniq Mirage. That Poly 6 there is actually the one that I just finished restoring. I got it about 6 months ago, and it was broken when I got it. But I just did a video series on my channel of restoring that to better than new, actually. And that, if you see there, the SH-101, the top right, that one I did a series on, and the JD-800 down there, I also did a series. So this is like my restoration rack, and you can see the Juno 106 there. That is also broken, and that's the next one in the restoration series that you'll be seeing coming up next. Anyway, so I got my Mirage, and I got my Poly 6, and then I thought, well, now that I'm working in clubs, I have an outlet to play this anything I wanted to do. I could start making things. So I got myself. I started off with just a cassette recorder, two cassette recorders, and I bounced back and forth. And then I got myself a little 4-track, and you'd start bouncing tracks until everything would descend into a layer of hiss. And I would start creating dance tracks that I could slip in with my set in whatever club I was playing in, and so that I could get my stuff heard without actually having to go through trying to pitch it anywhere, get it on the radio or whatever. And I never even thought that it would ever go anywhere. I was just doing it for fun because I loved making things. I thought some new record come out, and like, oh, I like that idea. I could do something like that, and I would just do it, and then I'd take it to the club and see if it worked. And just by doing that, I kind of got more of a feel of what worked on the dance floor, and it was just a lot of fun. That said, I was still a starving kid on his own in Toronto, so I didn't buy a whole bunch of library of tapes and have this collection of music that I had created over the years. Each week, I would just re-record over top of the old stuff from the previous week. So all the stuff I did back then is gone because I just use the same tapes over and over each week, which I really am disappointed in because I would love to hear that stuff today. And of course, as things do, it grew and grew into the point where, as I think I talked about fairly extensively last time I was on, realized that my hearing was going and I had to not do this job anymore, and did a hard pivot, went off into aviation, became a commercial pilot. At the time, I was actually also doing computers. So I was trying to do computers during the day, DJ at night. That worked for quite a while until the clubs started getting bigger and bigger and going till 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And then you can't really do a day job and that at the same time. But I had been, like Chris, I grew up doing electronics with the little electronic kits and building your burglar alarms and AM radios and all that stuff. And when the first computers came out, I had the ZX81, and then I had the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, and taught myself programming. And I had my first programming job when I was 17. I was hired in by a company that had hired a professional programmer to do the conversion on the system that nobody had ever heard of called Oasis. And I didn't know Oasis, but it was they had manuals, and I sat down and learned it and figured out the solution and fixed it. And they were amazed that this 17-year-old kid was able to do something that this professional they'd hired in said wasn't possible to do. So I kind of had this development career going underneath the music at the time, and then threw all that away, did aviation for a while until the economy tanked, and all of a sudden there were 20,000-hour pilots unemployed, willing to take $10 an hour instructing jobs, which meant that low-time pilots such as myself had no chance of getting any kind of work whatsoever. So I went back to computers, which is what I've done ever since. And like Chris, I've been a developer my whole life. It's still what I do today, although I had the same love of development work and getting my fingers into the code. And I'd have to say in the last few years, I don't know if I've lost that or if it's just changed enough that it's not really the same anymore, where you're working on massive systems and you have tiny little pieces here and there, and it's more tying together libraries than it is trying to actually write code. and I find myself doing more management and architecture and planning than actual coding anymore. The last real fun coding project I did, I also have a motorcycle YouTube channel called Goldwing Docs, because I have a Goldwing Docs website where I support people and teach people how to fix their Goldwing motorcycles. And I built a little computer for my motorcycle that controls the radio and controls the heat. And I did that just a little Amtel teensy processor with a LCD display. And that was, again, done in C just for fun. And that's, I think, probably the last time I've actually written anything just for fun. I haven't done a lot of crossover from music and computers other than MIDI and this kind of stuff where it's actually making stuff talk to each other or work together. Back when I was out of aviation, working in computers again, had kids and music had kind of like just gone from the forefront, and I decided, well, I've got all these old synthesizers with this old Poly 6 and stuff, and it's just sitting here collecting dust. I haven't used it in a couple of years. I need the room. I'm just going to sell all my stuff. And so I did, and sold for, nobody wanted old analog synths back then. And so I sold I think I sold my Poly 6 for $100, and it just pains me for what I sold all my old gear for. And then a few years back, a decade or so ago, I started doing more and more. And I had been doing some work in DAWs. I'd done the work in Cakewalk originally, and then I switched to Cubase. I've been on Cubase ever since. I say I chair for Cakewalk. So I've been working in Cubase for over a decade. And I started collecting synthesizers again. And of course, I don't have a problem. I can stop anytime I want to, and all the rest of it you can see. I've got, so this is my little studio here. I've got my, technically way more than I'll ever need or use, but it's kind of fun to do. And I have my little YouTube channel that I learn something and then I turn around and try and teach it. So I've got, MIDI routing and the, so I did just redo this studio not too long ago, and that turned into a series on the YouTube channel as well. So I seem to be able to explain things in a way that people understand. So I've had people say, "Hey, this is just recently. Somebody said I did something on the montage, and they said, "Hey, can you explain how to?" What was it? He wanted to do something about how you select different parts in a scene. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. So I'll just sit down and explain some aspect of some synthesizer, and people seem to really enjoy it. Another one, somebody, I think it was Rachel K. Collier, did a challenge, and one of the things she did was find a song or a sound on her Polybrute, which is a really interesting sound. And of course I heard that. I'm like, oh, I need a Polybrute. I love that sound. I definitely need a Polybrute. And I'm like, wait. No. You don't need a Polybrute. You can come up with that sound with what you have here. Go make it. And then I thought, actually, that's a video. I wonder if I can make that sound. So I did it as a video. I used the Summit, came up with the sound. I thought, I wonder if I could do it on the montage. I wonder if I could do it on the Hydrosynth. And so that was, here's how to make this sound on different synthesizers, and that got a lot of response. And people are like, "Hey, can you make more like that?" So, what originally was just a stupid little channel of, "Hey, here's a problem that took me a while to figure out. Here's how I fixed it," kind of thing. It wasn't really supposed to be any kind of ongoing thing as a YouTube channel. It was just once in a while I found a fix to something and said, here's how I fixed it, in case anybody cares. Is now I have people asking me and requesting to do different kinds of videos explaining things. So I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. It takes up a lot of time, but it's fun for me to do, and I have a list I keep on my phone of ideas of things people have asked for. In terms of using this stuff for music, it's I would love to say, hey, yeah, I've got albums coming out. When the pandemic hit and I had lots of free time, I was stuck at home. I sat down and said, okay, yeah, I'm gonna actually physically put an album out, and I did do that for the first time in a long time. Put together a whole bunch of songs. Actually made a CD. That was I don't think you can actually get it made anymore, but produced the CD and put out an album for the first time in well over a decade. And now I just whenever something strikes me, I'll if I have an idea, if I'm just messing around, I'm like, hey, that could be a song, and then I'll add it to my collection of unfinished songs. Once in a while, I'll finish one and then mix it and produce it and make a video and put it out, which I actually just finished and submitted a song that I've been working on for months. And once the video is finished, that will come out, I think, March 3rd. So it'll come out on my channel. Anybody cares? They care to see my wife walking around on the beach singing to this song that I wrote. It'll be out March 3rd on my YouTube channel and everywhere else, Amazon and all the rest of it.
Cool.
And yes, my wife is a singer, so that's extra bonus that I have built-in vocalist anytime I want vocals on my tracks, because I can sing but not like her. So that's about my background and how I got here. I do electronics once in a while. Obviously, when I'm restoring these synths, I'm ripping them apart and doing board level diagnostics and repair. So once all the old 80s synths are gone, I don't know if that'll continue, because you can't really do board level repair on multi-layer surface mounted digital synths. It's not really a thing.
Oh, but there is some modding possibilities. So
For sure.
think there's pretty much to talk about still.
Yeah, I did a Poly 800 restoration for a friend of mine, and that one I put in some mods to that as well, because it's a miserable little synth to work on, because it's back when the DX7 reigned supreme, and nobody wanted knobs because that's analog, that's old school. So to adjust the filter cutoff, you go to parameter 41 and then press increment 7 times, and that's your filter cutoff, which is stupid. So there's ways you can put actual potentiometers in there to do cutoff and resonance. So I did that for that synthesizer, and I mean for these as well. The SH101, I put a Tubatech upgrade in it, so it has MIDI and sequencers, more complex sequencers and arpeggiators in it. The Poly 6, same thing. I've got the QB6 upgrade in there, so it's got a sequencer in it and MIDI. So yeah, I do like kind of improving them as I go. I'm not a purist who is trying to make it the absolute perfect like it came from the factory synth. I like giving it the new capabilities. Plus, it means I'll use it, because if I had a Poly 6 back there, the bottom of the rack back there, that it would never get used in recording, because my workflow is typically MIDI. I will use the different instruments, but I'll capture it with MIDI, and then a lot of the time I'll have a sound and I'm like, okay, that fits well, but maybe as I'm working through the track later on, I'll say, well, actually, no, that sound doesn't really quite fit. Let me go back to this synth and tweak it a bit. And because I have the original performance captured in MIDI, I'll just reprint it back into the DAW. Whereas if you don't have MIDI, like on the Poly 6 with no MIDI, I'm not going to end up doing that, because you have to play everything live, which is not the end of the world. But the fact that it now has MIDI means I end up using it much more.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Chris, we will get back to you, but especially about your modular stuff and how you get it made, if you make it yourself or you get it produced in China and such stuff. But that's for later. Eddie, your background, how did you get into this? And how do you get out?
Okay. After listening to all of this, I came to two conclusions already. First of all, I know why I'm here, because by comparison, I'm just the eye candy. I'm not even half as interested as any of you alone, not even talk all of you three together. Second, I'm not worthy I'm totally not worthy. And when I grow up, I want to be like all of you. That's it. That's my. Okay, moving on. I'm done. Because no, I'm not. I mean, to me, repairing a synth is changing the memory battery. That's repairing a synth. That's all I can do. Building something, yeah. Since I've learned soldering, I think I know because it's what I basically do on my day job. But I mean, hardware soldering, not tech. Like in my partner does micro components in SMT. I just do through hole and not even through hole anymore because it's a long story. Music. Oh my God. The origins of me in music. I could say I always liked music because I'm a child of Disney. I was fed on musicals, breastfed on musicals, literally. And I always loved the fact that people would sing their emotions and their feelings out. And I'm still love musicals. I got a little more discerning and a little more demanding out of my musicals, but I still love them. Oh my God. Yeah, Chris, you talk about age. Where are you? Where are you white hair? Come on, you're the kid, the new kid in the block here. Because I'm talking. It's very blurry. So, in a nutshell, when the first knowledge I got about music was Disney films. After that, I jumped kind of it life threw me to a, because if anybody knows, I'm Spanish, a Spanish band that was, one of those kind of Disney bands that they put together of people that they don't even know each other just to play sometimes covers, sometimes originals, but for kids, literally for kids. But this one made the translation that I find out 2 years ago. They just did the translation for me. They did the whole music for the TV show, which was a cartoon based on space. All right? Based about, I think it was Force G or something. That was the English name. It was a team of people who could mutate into more powerful, probably the precursor of Power Rangers, like in 15 years earlier.
Fantastic Four.
No, it was, I think it's for G-Force, because there were 5 of them and they have a robot and stuff and they fought.
G-Force, I remember it. The flying thing with the motorcycle, Mark and Princess and Kia.
Exactly, and each one have their own vehicle, like a little bit like a mashup of Transformers, Power Rangers, and I don't know, Star Wars all in one.
Manga.
Star Wars. Yeah.
In Canada, it was called Battle of the Planets.
That's the one.
Ah, yeah.
That's the one.
Yep.
Sorry, names and stuff. Sorry, great.
Classic.
That's the one. So yeah, anime, Japanese manga. And that band did the translation to Spanish of the theme. So I thought they created it. Obviously, I fell into that one. But without, and also when I was searching for music on TV, like in top of the pop style shows that, like, in Spain we had like 1 or 2. Like in bands come in and do their mic syncing, the performance, and they play the music. Yes, it was Spain, and we had a kind of awkward situation because I'm talking mid 70s to mid 80s. Spain was kind of in the way out of the dictatorship, so borders were kind of opening up to anything coming from the outside. For anybody who doesn't know, Spain, since the 30s till the mid 70s, went through a period of a dictatorship, very quiet on a Russian level, like in closing borders, with the exception that it wasn't a communist dictatorship, but a fascist dictatorship.
Yeah, Franco.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Thank
Franco,
you.
yeah.
That's the one. So the artists were coming, but obviously they spoke English, so totally. I never understood lyrics. That's why after studying French, because my mom wanted me to at school, I swapped as soon as I could to English because I wanted to understand what those artists were talking about, what were the songs about, and artists like the Beatles. It took me half of my life to understand "She Loves You," yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did you sing along with it? Because I know growing up in Canada, when we would go to Quebec, it always amazed me that all the kids we would interact with that didn't speak English knew all the words to the songs and sang along with them, but had no idea what they were singing.
I did that a lot. I've done tons of phonetic mic singing,
phonetic,
tons, and not knowing what the words. I mean, I always put this because it's what is stuck in my head. My biggest, while I was already learning English and taking the time to translate lyrics, my biggest disappointment ever was Bon Jovi. I could not understand how a music so powerful, so harmonic, so melodic, so rhythmic, so awesome was just about I'm sad because my girlfriend left me. Because at the same time, Spain had a tradition of very poetic lyrics on every level of music. Again, you could not be a lyricist if you couldn't write poetry. That's the Spanish background. It did not connect. If you can't write poetry, why are you writing songs? Oh, because the words already sound like rhyming. Because phonetically they're very similar. In Spain, you don't have that luxury. You have to make them on purpose rhyme. Otherwise, there's no way. So that's why you need to be kind of a good poet to write lyrics, or even rewrite. Because of the whole country didn't have the English knowledge, we had our bands just translating the hit singles from other artists from other countries, mostly England and America. But at the same time, France. So that's another in there. Good, sorry. That was a big head segue. So, from Disney to, sorry, what was the name you said? Battle of the Planets? And
yes, that's right.
The people on the telly and the radio, I was being, not even knowing the word or what it meant, I was being fed with synth pop or synth-infused music from the late 70s, early 80s. Because I never knew any different, I thought, oh, that's how every music is like. So it's just how it is meant to be. I never knew that it was that way was being fed to me. Once again, TV show, fame. I didn't want to be Leroy. I didn't want to be anybody else but Bruno. I saw the keyboards, I heard the sounds, and said, that's what I want to be. Sorry. And I'm talking about the TV show because I learned about I wasn't old enough to watch the film because the film wasn't for all audiences, but the TV show was. So I could watch the TV show, but I never watched the film until I was in 20s or later, I don't know. Which I even love even more, but I kept saying, okay, great, I want to do those sounds, I want to learn. Problem is, because I saw him basically playing in one hand, because the other hand was off camera, basically. But I was saying, good, so I can do things with one hand, that's fine. Then I learned that, no, wait, you need to play piano, or I was told, because also in my country, Spain, when I was a child, if you didn't go to the conservatory, you were not a musician. Like socially was never recognized as a profession. You're just somebody who's trying to avoid working. Real work, actual work that gives money, because musicians are scum of society, depraveds, and scumbags, basically lazy scumbags. That was the kind of conceptual ex-dictatorship regime that I was being bombarded with. Right? So musician is not a profession unless you take 10 years, because that's how it lasted when I was a child, 10 years in the conservatory. Sorry about that. All right. Well, so okay, let's be a keyboard player or synth player. Then, wait, what's the closest thing to a synth? Piano. Sorry, piano needs two hands. Ooh, I don't think I can play with just both hands, doing complete independent things. At the same time, I was watching classical music, and then you see those people back in the 70s playing concertos, and you go like, am I gonna do that? No way, I can't play that. So, well, but synth you can play with one hand. So a lot of confusion. But what really put me away was the biggest deterrent is when I said, okay, let's take it seriously. At the same time, I was learning by my way. I was doing my first years in the conservatory, trying to appease my parents. Says, yes, I'm going to take it seriously. I want to make a profession out of this. It's not just a phase. And the deterrent, the biggest deterrent is when I went to the shop. I tell this many times. Sorry to bore everybody. And I went to, hey, how much is a synthesizer? I might be, I don't know, 12, 14, sort of. How much is a synthesizer? They give me one cipher. And I went like, wow, that much? Really? Once again, 1980s in Spain and change pounds to pesetas. This number grew kind of exponentially. Plus, I'm 12, I don't have a job, and my parents aren't rich, so they're not going to pay for that. They're barely going to pay if I ask for a keyboard, which I'm not really convinced I'm going to be able to play. At that point, I was just learning theory music, about music. Don't put on. So, and at the same time, I was thinking, okay, what's the instrument that everybody who starts in music around me in Spain is playing? Guitar. Spanish guitar. Right. But then I went, yeah, but I don't want to play Spanish guitar, although I have one that I got gifted by my grandmother, one of those 3/4 things that I never even learned how to tune at that moment. But at the same time, I was learning and checking music and learning that, and I bumped into Jimi Hendrix. Like, oh, wait a second. That guy is making weird noise stuff like the guy in Fame, but he's using a guitar. So you can do it with a guitar. And it's half the price, I thought. Because we were talking, let's talk pounds in nowadays cipher that we're talking, oh, a synth is like 4,000 pounds, right? And a Spanish guitar was more like 500 pounds or 200 pounds. I can go for the guitar. And I can even start with that one and then jump to the electric, which was already, but by that time I can start learning. Because I thought it was the same technique. No, kids, it's not the same technique. Like from Spanish to electric. The only thing they have in common is they both have 6 strings. Well, electric's not anymore, but that's another business. And then I said, okay, bye-bye keyboards. I'm never going to be able to afford it because I don't think I'm ever going to be able to make both hands do something together. Independently. That's another reason why I never took drums, because it's like, oh, wait a second, he's doing one thing with one hand, this one with and one foot and the other foot. No, I'm not that coordinate. So let's simplify. So that's why I said, okay, is it the guitar or wind? And I never felt like having the breath power because I thought it was all breath, all about having sport-like stamina. Once again, all my music life is being drawn by ignorance. That's the only thing I'm an expert at. I know nothing. I'm a biggest ignorant on earth. Plus, nobody in my family nobody was a musician. I was around music lovers, but not musicians. I know that in talking to these people, they might not seem like independent, but yeah, we call them melómanos. somebody who loves music, listening to music, but has no knowledge, sometimes not even any inclination to do the deed. Once again, all that in the context that being a musician wasn't a recognized, legitimate profession in Spain. Instruments were crazy expensive, even the classical ones, because obviously the classical ones you only had the cream of the cream classical stuff. Or then it was all the imports of the electric stuff was all the imports coming from abroad, inflated by imports and duty taxes and everything. Plus, too many people thinking that was only noise. That was a music, that was noise. It's not until the 80s that the voices claiming that the Beatles were nothing but noise shut up in Spain. So think about that. And I love the Beatles because, and I was exposed to a very big collection of albums that my stepfather had. All sorts and mostly imports. Like in American bands, British bands, kind of a couple of French, but I didn't really care for the French. They were a little too softy, too mellowy for me. Think about that, coming from Disney. So what's next? And then I said, okay, guitar, learning guitar, Spanish. I jump into I almost broke my first Spanish because I put steel strings in it. Once again, ignorant. Nobody told me you should not, or why, but I did anyway, and I broke it, kind of. I mean, I bent the neck, obviously. But I managed to sell it to somebody who knew even less than I did. I still feel bad about it. Then I jump into a jumbo, a dreadnought steel string with a pickup, and I said, okay, that's it, that's my electric. Hendrix, here I come. No, it doesn't work that way. Nobody told me that feedback, it's a thing, and big boxes don't like distortion, etc. So yeah, made another effort to electric. And then guitar. But in the back of my mind was always but I want to go beyond this sound, or this one sound with 2 or 3 different EQs that you can apply that this instrument does. I'm still dreaming about Danny, Bruno Martelli, and the Synth, and a whole full orchestra just with 2 hands. Even when I couldn't play, I started playing decent stuff, but not to my knowledge. I don't know. I'm jumping decades and years and stuff. But once again, nothing really as significant as you people have managed. Computers, yes, I love computers. I love playing arcade games because my own first computer that I bought with my money was in 2014. The first computer that came into my family was in 1995. I want to say probably 98. Windows 3.1, an IBM computer, just to play basically CD-ROMs and muck around. I did some basic programming on Amstrads in school, but that was it. Like in jumping, the next opportunity to have a computer to do something with it was like 7 years later, so wipe off. Plus growing up and what's the name? When you're a teenager, puberty. You know that, right? You're familiar with it. So hormones stuff, girls, which was kind of the secondary reason to go for guitar. Like, chicks dig guitar players. No, once again, ignorant. No, they don't. They like rock stars, which is a completely different business. So, I don't know. I'm just trying to. If anybody has fallen asleep already, yeah, good. So,
we're down to 17 viewers now.
You want? Sorry, come again.
We're down to 17 viewers now.
Once again, I told you I'm just the eye candy. I should not even speak.
Chris, wanted to ask. I know Henrik alluded to it. Did you actually have Eurorack modules that you had produced, like manufactured?
Yes. Not manufactured, made myself. So I build circuit boards out of a thing called strip board, which is basically a pre-made. Build all the circuits myself and then drill all the panels and do the artwork myself. I'm moving out of that though.
Yeah, I did the same thing with. I had actually a product for the motorcycles that again I just had the PC boards manufactured and then I would populate and solder, but it's very time consuming. I was only going to ask that because I know Henrik said something about having things manufactured in China, and I actually have had a couple startups. And my second startup, we had a product that we had to get manufactured in China, and it was interesting. We had a big failure rate where we had probably 20% of the units defective, but it was still cheaper to do that and get 20% defective ones than it was to actually have them manufactured here in the U.S.
I don't think 20% is a big failure rate in nowadays production.
No,
I think it's
but that wasn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem was that we discovered that the company that we'd contracted to manufacture them was also deciding to manufacture their own version of our product and sell it separately.
Yes, this problem. Yes,
and they used our firmware, so then we had to change it so that we changed it so that we loaded the firmware individually when the products came across, so they didn't have access to our firmware.
Yep. Never give them the source code.
Yeah, it was awful.
I assume you both know. I was told this by a Chinese citizen here in UK in a very weird situation. Meeting people to talk English to practice when I was in Bristol. Obviously, the conversation came, and the question came: why? I mean, awkward as it sounds, we asked them, why do Chinese manufacturing are so keen on copying other people's products? The reply was, because we don't even have a word for intellectual property. We don't know the concept. We never got taught, and the government doesn't encourage it. Anything that comes in our way is free to replicate.
Yeah.
Because as a communist paradigm, like knowledge is for everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Everybody's thing.
It's definitely something to be aware of, the cultural differences.
Yeah.
But Chris, when you plan to do something, will you do it on a page like PCB Way, get a page in China, and then produce more modules, or will you use a company to produce it?
At this point in time, I'm not thinking too much about assembly services. I guess it's a classic case of I haven't decided yet. At this point in time, I'm focused on producing prototypes, and then I'll see if there's interest. And if there is interest, then I have to sort of make the decision about whether, based upon the interest, whether this is something I need to pursue, to commit to producing a certain quantity, and therefore, is this something I can manage myself? Is this something am I willing to solder all these things together, sourcing all the components? Because I know that when you go to anything that's outside of hobbyist levels, you're starting to deal with larger component counts, which means you're starting to deal with supply issues, which is on a different level for the manufacturers that we all buy stuff from. But it is still, as you scale up, things start to become more difficult. I mean, even now I'm keeping an eye on the lead times and amount of components that I never used to care about. I never used to look at it, 500, why would I ever need 500? Well, actually, what could happen in the future? I don't know. So at this point in time...
I was going to say, one of the products that I actually built and sold on my Goldwing site at one point when it was very, very popular, the main component that it was built around went unavailable. Couldn't get any. I bought everything they had, and then I used those up, and I had none left. And so I ended up having to redesign the product and the circuit board, everything around a new product and replacement that I sourced. And then 5 years later, same thing happened again. And that one went unavailable. So then at that point, the sales had tapered down. I'd kind of saturated the market. I'm like, okay, I think this product's done. So it's a real problem.
It is. And I'm guessing that was probably CPU related, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem at the moment. There's kind of a balance between obsolescence of CPUs, basically people putting it out of production, and copying. So one of the things that's interesting is happening is that the Chinese are now copying some of the CPUs. So if they decide that they want to produce lots of things going forward with that, if they'll copy that, and there's an abundance of that CPU. So now designing products, it seems you also need to be sort of almost a chip speculator. You have to be able to, you have to be good at picking chips that you think are going to have longevity because of the way they're being operated in the market or the way they're being used in the market. So it's not something I think any electronic designers ever thought that they'd have to learn.
And there's another issue again with the Chinese. Unfortunately, I hate to keep harping on Chinese, but
it's the same.
Chips, classic chips. Things for like the old synthesizers, 8-bit processors, VI chips, interface chips that are becoming extremely hard to find. They have factories that are taking these chips, ripping them out, and reselling them. But often, if they can't find it, I mean, this is a huge problem with the 6581 SID chip for the Commodore 64. They will take chips that look like it, scrape the surface off, print, counterfeits information, and then that gets into the supply chain. And because it's in the supply chain, you don't know if it's real or not. It's just like the counterfeit circuit breakers you can buy at Home Depot. They're in the supply chain. They have no way of validating whether it's real or not.
It is a real problem. And feedback modules, guys that I've just got a nice shipment of, thank you very much, guys. They have had to discontinue some of their modules because they're receiving either difficulty sourcing chips or receiving too many counterfeit versions of them. It's and as I said, once stuff gets into the supply chain, because they've allowed really the supply chain to outpace our monitoring of it, we are now stuck with this problem where there's going to be a fair bit of this happening for a while, I think. And I don't know how much of that is is directly tied up in what people talk about chip shortage, or whether they're exclusively, sourcing chips from reputable sources, and when they become short, that's what they mean, or whether this is a mixture going on now. I think it depends on the size of the developer. Assuming your Behringer is doing a fair bit of manufacturing of their own chips and also doing a fair bit of control of supply. So when they can't get stuff done and they can't guarantee that it's supply chain, then they're going to say it's short and they're not going to produce them for a while. Whereas other people are taking a few more risks, possibly, and maybe they know they're doing that, maybe they don't know they're doing that. But every so often you're going to hear about this situation coming up, and sometimes we'll find out the reason behind it. Sometimes it'll be guessing,
and then
if that's happened.
And sometimes they get bit, like Korg with the Op6 displays. They had a whole batch of Op6s go out with counterfeit displays in them, and they all started failing within a year. And so they've got a program where you can get them replaced for free, but they sent them out and they had no idea.
No. It's going to get like cars, is it? We're going to have to start having safety recalls on our synths.
Shall we continue with your story, Chris? And then I will open the doors for people to join the stream.
Okay. I'm trying to remember where I was up to. Hopefully it's not much longer. It's not much more. I was talking about the, it's kind of segues, isn't it? We're talking about producing modules.
Yeah.
So as I was telling Scott, the modules I produce for my percussion synths I'm looking at right over there. That's what I'm looking at. Were produced on strip boards. It's a common technique, but it's generally considered a prototype technique. One of the things is that I've done so much of it now that it's sort of become a bit of an art, and I kind of wear it as a bit of a badge now. At the same time, I am moving into PCB manufacture with proper PCB design and routing, and that's what I'm doing at the moment with my next module that's coming. I am learning all that, although it's true that I have had some experience in this before, because I was doing a bit of electronic design for PCB routing, which was they used to produce prototype PCBs using a PCB router, which is a mechanical process of actually cutting copper. These days they use completely different processes, and plus a little bit of routing as well. But I actually was designing CNC type devices to actually cut out print circuit boards, and I produced a few boards with that hardware before I ran into problems and realized I was out of my depth designing hardware for printing circuit boards. However, that did give me experience in basic EDA, which is electronic design architecture. So I'm not relearning it from scratch, but I am. It's still taking quite a bit of time to do it properly and to dot the I's and cross the T's. And it's a bit different now that you have to, of course, with sending your boards away from manufacturer, you have to be a lot more careful about picking up your errors and stuff like that, because it can be a bit costly, especially for in terms of time for me and here in Australia, because PCB manufacture in Australia still takes, I think, a minimum of 4 weeks to get anything outside of the country. China deliveries are just slow, no matter who you order it from. It comes from China, it takes 4 weeks. I wish it wasn't like that, and that's part of the reason why you probably should always consider using local PCB manufacturers. The cost is like 16 times more, but it is one of those things where if you want them done and you want them done quickly, go local. In my case, I am weighing up whether I want to take the risk or not. I think at this stage, I don't have a lot of people waiting for these. This is just a design. Before now it was in my head. I'm sure there's interest, but I have to be mindful here that this is my first proper project, using proper manufacturing, proper PCB, and then assembling it and doing all that kind of stuff. So I don't want to rush this, and I don't want it to become not fun. So that's what I'm concentrating on, keeping it fun, but also learning, because it's important for me to learn new skills, because my job is ending in a year of over 15 years. And I have to start thinking about other career options. It was a little bit unexpected, but fortunately, I have from when I found out about it was 15 to 16 months before we have to shut down shop and leave the thing. So I have time to basically do what I've never done, which is shop for jobs. So something everyone probably has done lots of times in their career. For me, it's a bit of a new thing for me. So yeah, I'm learning. So that'll be part of that.
I've done it too many times.
Yeah.
When you are doing those PC boards, and I know there is the drive to get it perfect. Despite all of that, you end up there will be mistakes, because
that's right.
And sometimes you don't even know about it. It might be, I know in my case, with the bike PC that I actually built, I found a fault that was actually, it was a fault that was in the design of the circuit, not the PC board. But at that point, I'd already had the PC boards manufactured en masse, and the thought of going into all these things and cutting traces, and so I thought about it for a couple of days, and I thought, you know what, I think I can fix this in code. And I was able to actually write changes into the firmware that worked around it and fixed it without having to do any changes at all. So
Yeah.
that kind of thing is when you're in the world of microprocessors really helpful at times.
That is why it's really wise, and I'm not necessarily following this advice very well, but it's wise to use a CPU that is more powerful and has more I/O than you actually need, because then it gives you options in code to get around hardware issues.
Yeah.
Ironically, I've experienced the very thing you have at my work, where I have been an embedded systems engineer and has had to fix problems in hardware, in software.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, we're familiar with that particular troubleshooting approach. It's an important skill, I think, to have as a microprocessor developer. I mean, programmer. It's a useful thing. It's a useful skill to have anyway. Yeah. So good props to you, Scott, for getting around that problem. It's a thumbs up for that one. So I guess back to what I was saying about the modules sitting there. I'm going to show you videos on my YouTube channel about how they work and what they do, how they came about. I have a few other modules here that are in my module that are used for random step generation and stuff like that, which I'll also be showing. They're properly integrated into Eurorack, so CVs and triggers and all that good stuff. That's kind of my next generation of sort of stuff. And so then I think I've also got a YouTube video about the stereo mixer, 8 HP mixer that I made for this as well, which is on my YouTube page, which is, again, it's another stripboard project, but that's one where it's rock solid, amazingly, and it's on stripboard. So how long it lasts, I don't know. But it is doing me proud at the moment, so I'm quite happy with that. So that's why I'm moving into other modules, because I've been encouraged by what's been going on with the current design, and I can see the eyes opening up a bit to what potential is still out there for modules that somewhat do a bit of Swiss Army knife work, sort of solving problems that people didn't know they have. I'm a little bit skeptical about module manufacturers all producing malts and gates and malts and passive malts. And does everyone need to produce every single one of those? I guess it's a thing about, branding, and thinking about having a consistent look in a module. And I understand aesthetics is a factor for some people in modular, and I'm not going to say anything bad about that, because everyone has their own likes and dislikes, and there's
need lots of flashing lights.
Yes. So if Darren was here, he'd be saying more flashing lights, please. So I'm mindful of that. So I think he's going to be disappointed with my current one, because there's not enough flashing lights. But I am working on something that's going to have a ridiculous amount of flashing lights, which I think maybe I'll be able to put him down as a definite customer for that. So that's pretty much it. I mean, that's my story. I'm still producing music. I've produced more music. I produced music for these SEG segments, which is really sort of reintroduced me back into. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, because you set down the template, and that made it really easy for me to follow, which gave me an in to that window in my mind that has been a little bit closed for years.
Okay.
So I haven't been composing as much as I'd like, and exercising that part of my brain has really helped me open my mind a bit more to producing more music.
Sadly, template is not a figure of speech on my case. More on that later.
I use a template for my NTSs to start with. Yeah, it's a valid technique to use a template.
Now for the hard question, Chris. What's on your table?
Do we have all night?
Do you mean this thing, or do you mean in general? What's on my table? Everything.
I mean, what's on the table? Everything.
Everything. Oh, you mean or what's coming up? Is that what you mean?
No. I mean, what's on your table? Physical.
Oh, okay. you want the actual
The gear.
Reader's
Yeah.
Digest gear list. I should do this properly, really, with the second camera. But perhaps that would be a better thing for another show, or perhaps maybe Ranz's show. But I can just give you a basic rundown of what I have here. So I have two modular racks here that are quite modest in size. They're both, sorry, I'm probably not off camera, aren't I? There are two modular racks here that are of modest size. They're not full rack with 19-inch width rack size modulars. They're 63 units. There's a third one up there, which is just actually it's just out of shot. This is sort of my development rack. That's what I use for immediately testing stuff that comes in, or stuff that's just been built. Those two, that's my main modular there at the back here. This is my main modular. And this has my mixer. It has all my favorite modules. All my favorite modules. One fraction of my favorite modules. An oscilloscope here.
It's too white. We can't see what's beneath the light.
So we'll go back to go back to normal. How's that? Yeah. That's better. So I could, if I pick up the camera, unfortunately, I'm afraid it's going to pull out of the actual computer, which would be bad. So, but anyway,
we can live with this.
Okay, so I've got a so I've got the main modular here with the rhythm generation section here, which is something that I'll be showing in my videos, the random sequencer at the bottom of the rack, and the normal sort of 63 units here. There's an additional sort of not quite 1 unit. It's sort of a rack on its side, if you know what I mean. It's just filling up space here that I've got another module of mine, which is a gate, a simple gate attack and release module, the thing with the pink LED. Over here is my oscilloscope, digital oscilloscope, which is because I don't have a Mordax data. I have an old just pocket oscilloscope. I can pull it out. A pocket oscilloscope. That's all it is. But it's modified for Eurorack, so it has jacks coming into it like a Mordax data. So it's basically, and it's in a 3D printed frame that allows it just to come in and come out, and the connectors socket in like that. And that's really important for the development of modules that I do, because obviously I need to be able to see what signals are being generated and when, stuff like that. It's good for debugging even modules that are built, because troubleshooting your own module builds is still a skill that you need if you're going to be building a lot of them like I love doing. So that's there. Overflow rack. I've already outgrown this. It's already overflowed. I have more modules in there than I can fit in here, or here. But this is my another rack with similar sort of architecture, but this one has the modules on the side section as well along the top, which is sort of a fake 1 unit style. It's using normal modules because I don't like having to buy a different standard of modules just for putting them in a different place. Both of these racks are made by me. I do metalworking and plastic and stuff like that as well. I didn't go into that because otherwise we would have been here another 4 hours. But I also do manual machining.
Wow.
So these racks have been designed and built by me as well, out of plastic and obviously real rack rails, of course, but extrusions, but plastic sides and plastic backs. That one's wood. There is another holding rack up there, which is a concept. I don't know if anyone's probably have heard of it. A place to store your modules when you're not using them other than your drawer. It's a 3D printed module system. So it's you just keep on slotting more 3D printed things into it, making it longer and longer and longer and longer and longer.
Okay.
And the idea behind that is simply being able to put the modules in, to clip a little plastic thing over, and it holds them there safely and stops them from getting damaged if you store them correctly, obviously. They still get dust on them, so that's a bit of a problem. I put them in a plastic bag, but it keeps them there, and it means they're still visible. So you could do things like, oh, I need this module. Hang on. Oh, I've already got one. I forgot I had that. I know you could use modular grid for that too.
Yeah,
you should always check your modular. You should check your modular grid before you buy anything, but it's very hard to sometimes, especially when someone's having a 30% off sale. Feedback modules. I'm looking at you. So that's that area. Just out of shot, we have a drum brute. The drum brute impact. Sorry. We have a Behringer Crave here, which I'm not using enough, but I have got it in the right spot. Everyone seems to have it in the studio over here, so that's what I've done. I've noticed. But I don't use that as much as I should. Shame on me. There is a BeatStep Pro over there. I have a Korg Electribe up there. These are sitting up here because, they look like they're being used, but they're actually not being used at the moment. Then down here we have the Moog Sub Fatty, which at the moment has a table on it because it's really useful as a desk space, unfortunately. But it has been. I have refurbished it, so it had been. It did have the sticky panel problem. I talked about that a couple on Ranzie's show. Had the sticky side panels. That's been restored. And it's unfortunately all the electronics is fine, other than the octave switch. I have a rack behind me here. You can see it. The lighting is actually working. Okay, I just realized what I can do. You're an idiot, Chris.
No, you're not.
Duh. Okay, so this is for Wagoo. 19-inch rack. Woohoo!
Hey.
19-inch rack. Oh, yeah, good on.
Yep.
Eddie
Love
likes
it.
this stuff too.
I love them.
Okay, so
I don't understand this new revolution of desktop stuff. To me, it's a waste of space.
Is the mood lighting working? Oh, it's already changing color. Just put it onto a color so that we can perhaps. There you go. Oh, lights. Gratuitous expense, not expense spared in streaming. Okay, so we have a MIDI Verb 3, which is one of those things I can't part with because it was in reverb in so many of my 90s tracks.
Okay.
The Behringer Eurorack Pro. Why on earth did they call it Eurorack Pro? Anyway, Eurorack Pro. It's a 16-channel sub mixer. Yeah. Which is still indispensable for me. I've even got the modular going through it. And it's cheap, cheerful, and clean. You can overdrive it, which I do frequently. Which has then underneath it is my homemade patch bay. Yes, he's a DIYer. Homemade patch bay, which used to have and still does have most of my hardware synths around the place hooked into. It's much reduced now because I much prefer to just plug a lot of my gear directly into my interface because I get much better quality and more control. And cabling can be an issue in here because there's too much stuff and too much cables, and I lose track of where everything is because I'm not very organized.
Yeah,
but
I do a spreadsheet for that.
Yes. I have I'm probably not powered up. What is it? Poly 800. You've seen that briefly on my Poly 800 name that synth segment. That deserves another video, I think, because and it sounds like Scott, you might be interested in that. Very similar to what you did mod-wise in terms of the analog controls. What I did do that's different to mine is make it a module. I hacked the firmware so that the filter cutoff is tied to the mod wheel, which is okay. It's a bit steppy, but it's still been opened up a lot of possibilities. I mean, some MIDI control over the filter cutoff is actually really, really useful, I find. And it has a numeric data entry pot. So
Nice.
instead of having to go oh shit, I lost it. What did I do?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. It's got a change number, click, done. That works really well. That was another one of those stripboard projects, but as I said, I've been doing that for so many years. It's just natural to me now. Underneath that is my D110, a purchase I got on eBay from a local guy here in Australia, who at the same time, I think about a day later, the D05 was released, which was actually what I wanted, but I didn't know it existed. So I bought the D110 thinking I was never going to be able to get a D550, and I didn't have room for a D50. But I had owned a D550 for a year or two, and I kind of wanted it back again because I started hearing it used in a few tracks, and I was going, oh, that LA, that percussive plus synthesis, percussion sample plus synthesis sound with just that particular filter and arrangement was just something I was craving. So the D110 was a purchase for satisfying that LA synthesis pang that I had, but shamefully, to not fair to the module, but I pretty much almost put it down and turned away from it because I was so angry that I'd spent my money on that instead of a D05. Okay. And I was so angry that despite my better judgment, I held off buying a D05 until they bloody sold out.
Ouch.
One of my biggest regrets. Don't ever do that again, was what I told myself, and I haven't ever done that again. That's why I'm a little bit poorer. But anyway, it's better than, what do you call it? It's a moment of madness is better than a lifetime of regret.
Okay.
I'm beginning to agree with that. It should come with a proviso, though, providing you can afford it.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Anyway, so that's the D110, which I have used a bit more since then, and it's getting a bit more action than it gets a bit more that it deserves more, and it's getting more. CX817 is underneath that. I was talking about that before. It's a 4-apparator FM synth. That's my little Robbie corner. Hey, Robbie. I do get quite deep into FM synthesis when I do FM synthesis, and I did learn the whole sort of.
Not worthy.
Oh no! Well, I did have to, to get that. I think Robbie talks about the moment where it just clicks. I have had that experience.
I was about to say the same thing. It's not that difficult a concept. Or once you figure out what it's doing, it's not so much understanding how it works. It's just how do the algorithms sound, and knowing what algorithm to use to get. Like I want like something sounds like a saw wave. I know this is the algorithm I want. I want noise. Oh, okay, I want this type of feedback. So it's not really that complex. And I think a lot of it was driven because the programming interface on the DX7 was just so inscrutable, and
the letterbox.
Yeah, and once you get something like the Op6, which just lays it all out, you've got your operators and your carriers as knobs and sliders right on the front of the thing. It makes it so much easier and to conceptualize that it makes it a lot more accessible.
That's what I keep telling to myself, just so I don't sell all my FM things and I say, oh, one day I'll do understand this and I'll do something about it. Not gonna happen.
Hi, Ian.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hey,
Hi,
Ian.
How are we doing?
Hey,
Hiya.
Rob.
I've missed
Welcome,
you.
both.
What, me?
Yeah, you. I haven't seen you for bloody ages.
Yeah.
I know, mate. I know. We'll have to blame Kent Spong.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. He's awful.
Yeah. He's not been well, though, has he?
No, he hasn't.
Oh.
No. What you say about FM is right. If you approach it, if you go into it and think, "Oh God, this is going to be really difficult," because it's like it's mathematics and all this kind of stuff, you will fail. You'll fulfill your own prophecy, because it will become impenetrable, and you'll do something, and the sound will go from something nice to something awful really, really quickly, and then you'll get disheartened and discouraged, and you'll forget about it. But if you go into it, like Scott said, if you just say, "Hey, right, okay, so I want a sound that sounds a bit like preset 15." Okay, well, that's my starting point. That's that, and then I go in, and you start messing around with the frequencies, and and just hearing how changing something on that modulator affects that carrier, and the amount of feedback, and the Op6 really did kind of open everything up and make it obvious. Although I have seen some people using the Op6 in completely the wrong way. They think, "Oh, faders, that's just volumes."
Yeah. I mean, I have to
Oblivious
say,
to how they're sort of working. Yeah.
it opened it up for me, big time.
Yeah.
Because
What really did it for me was the Essence FM.
Yeah, but still, I think
you see
FM is missing that part where you sit and enjoy working towards listening towards
a sweet
the
spot.
final result. Yeah, a sweet
Happy
spot.
accident.
Yeah.
You
It's
have
a
to
different.
do almost nothing to get the sweet spot. And
Yeah.
I think
And
Manny,
it's so
Manny
easy
summed it
to-
up recently.
Yeah.
He said FM has more sweet spots than analog, or some subtractive analog. However,
They're harder to find.
they're harder to find, and they're much you can deviate from them very, very easily. Whereas with subtractive analog,
Overshoot.
you could just kind of move around, and it kind of sounds the same, but you've got a bit more of this or a bit more of that. But FM, you just literally knock it up one notch on one particular parameter, and you go from this. You can't bloody hear it now. There you go. You go from this to and that's when you go, "Oh my God, what did I do?" So
There's a lot of what did I do with FM
Yep.
sound design?
Yep. Never change too many parameters at the same time. That's my
Exactly.
first rule in FM. And always
One at a time.
always
Boys,
save
one at a time.
frequently, save the patch frequently, and always hit the compare button when you're confused.
yeah.
yeah, but
Is
that's
it still
what
there? Oh yeah, good. It's still there.
Yeah, but what I like about subtractive synthesis and sampling, it's subtracting too when you filter it afterwards. What I like about that is it sounds good all the way.
Yep.
You are not hurt during making the sound.
The in-between
I
steps
find-
are also gratifying.
When
I
you
find
make, when
when
you
I'm
make an
doing it
omelet,
on the Modi X or the montage, I will do the basic sound in FM and get that clear bell sound, whatever I want, and then I'll use the filters after the fact or the effects or reverb, and that's where I have the tuning. I won't try and get that done on the FM side of things.
But
Kinda
what if
use
you
both sides?
What if you don't need a bell?
get another synth.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
just then you need
Yeah,
an EP or a bass.
I don't think FM is the greatest thing for I need the sound now.
No.
If it's a sound that is on your FM keyboard, you've got the patch there. It's perfect. Obviously, nothing else can really match it. For that sound, you got that sound, and it's the one.
It also
But,
depends on what
yeah.
type of FM you're talking about, because if you're talking about the phase distortion FM like in the DX7, that's a whole different ball game than the FM that you might find in a Summit or even an analog FM.
Oh
Emulated.
yeah, totally different. In modular world, is particular.
Yep.
FM is much more scientific-y, and it's a lot closer to to sort of the more pure subtractive synthesis. It's not too far away. You do a bit of FM, and then you go, I've had enough FM now. I think I'll just put it into my low pass filter, and I'll just return to the comfy chair
sorry, I'm not familiar with the phrase "I've had enough FM." Does not compute.
You can't even pronounce it.
I can't say the M word.
Enough.
FM.
By the way,
Yeah.
Rob, is your room grown? Because it looks like you can fit more gear now.
No, I think it's probably the camera angle.
It's a-
Thank you.
Yeah,
You changed the camera.
Yeah, one of the things actually I haven't actually changed this. I need to change it. Because when I did the stream last night, people were saying that there was this kind of noticeable delay. It was kind of like a Toho movie. You want to fight?
Hello.
And
I think it's there.
but no, I need to change the source. But
It's all there.
But I've got this. Yeah, I've got this Sony camera which I've had for a little while now, and it gives you kind of a wider view. But there's no, it hasn't grown. In fact, space has diminished because I got that last week. That's now sitting on the floor, and all my samplers are behind that. And I need to get a new rack unit and
Bigger house, mate.
Yeah, bigger.
house.
I need to get rid of the wife and the kids.
Yeah.
I got a new rack. I tried doing that, and now it's full of synthesizers
I know.
already.
Yeah. It's crazy. No, I need a 19-inch rack unit, but I need something that has at least 28 plus slots. But then not only do I need that, but I also need a place to put that. So that's the difficult thing.
I suggest you get 2 12s and whatever left.
No, it has to be like as singular as possible, as narrow as possible.
Then go for a network one.
You have I know Tolman's has it and Anderton's, and I don't think you can get it in the U.S. But they have those. Are they Jegs racks? But they're like very high vertical racks, and they just don't sell them over here.
Jaspers?
Jaspers, that's it.
Jasper.
you
Well,
can't
yeah.
get
I
it
mean, I've
here.
got all of this stuff is on Jaspers, on all the keyboards as far as they're concerned. But Gear for Music have got this 28U, and it's basically 2 pieces of metal that go down and then have legs. So it's just they're like an L where the back of the L has been lent back, and it's 28U, and that should accommodate what I've got now. But I'm always one of these people that if I need 28U, then really I should be getting 56.
Yes.
If you want a mixer with 12 channels, get one with 24 because you know as soon as you fill the 12 up, you're going to want more. But yeah, what I really want is a proper decent rack.
Funny you mentioned, but
the space.
Mixers and rack space and a couple of other things in the studio. It's, to my knowledge, it's weird that nobody does a modular system that you just add up as long as you go. As in mixers, I know it would be really hard to do and very, very hard to produce, but like they kind of like they do with Eurorack, you can buy an 8 and then an expander and another expander and another expander.
Yeah.
I understand.
We need a
I've
mod-
kind of done that because I have this X32 over here. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
That was my solution to running out of, because I had a 22 MTK which I ran out of channels. So I thought, okay, the X32 will have lots of channels that I'll be able to put into, and then I have a sub mixer over here that is basically used as my monitor mixer. You can't see it off camera, but you can plug in expansions into this. So
Yeah. When you go digital, yes, they do it. Like
yeah,
Nuage
and so if I want
all
another box, I can put another 16 channel box down there and cable it up here, and the idea is
obviously,
that I don't have to buy another mixer again.
I always think from the baroque musician point of view, which is me, I would rather have something analog that you can just plug 4 more channels and 4 more channels and 4 more channels. Obviously, it's not going to work. It's too hard to.
I guess, I mean, most people
make
just have
real.
they buy another mixer and it feeds into another channel, and they have one main
then you
mixer
have 2,
and sub
then you run out of room. But you see,
Manny will tell. Manny might know. Hi, Manny, by the way.
hello,
Hi, Manny.
welcome.
Morning, hear me?
Didn't Yamaha have this thing, and it was confusingly called the TF1, which was just like 8 channels, and you could put another 8 and another 8.
Nuage. Is that their Nuage system?
No, this I think it's an
Nuage
older.
does
thing.
This is older beforehand. Yeah, I remember something like that. It was
Michael Whalen's got
stackable.
them. Yeah, Michael Whalen's got some. I'm sure.
And obviously, it didn't work out because
Well,
many reasons.
Yeah, who knows? But I'm sure
So
that.
many reasons. production.
I mean, I've got an O2R downstairs in its box in the garage that I bought. I've literally got nowhere to put it. I desperately need to employ it, but
I have a gap.
I've got nowhere to play it.
Yeah.
But that gap's not here. The gap's not here.
You see, there's always a problem. Always there's a problem. There's always a problem.
So,
Yeah.
Anyway, so thanks to me pop on. I wake up late, and then you guys get into this FM discussion. I'm thinking, are you kidding me?
well, if you're going to have FM, you got to have you.
Yep.
Well,
It's our fault.
Robbie, that line you said is great. If I said it, I don't remember it. About the sweet spots.
I'm certain it was you.
It may have been.
I literally hang on your every word. I'm certain it was you.
Well, but it's well to the point, because as Scott was saying, is that you don't want to do too much stuff at once. You want to just maximize the parts. So starting like with a preset and then juggling it around is the way to go. But it's result oriented, right? Chowning always said it's a by ear thing.
Yeah.
And yes, you could start. I learned it from totally the technical side, but after a while, that's irrelevant, right? Algorithm 15 is this, just like a pulse width mod wave is that, and you put them together. But I think it was, I don't remember if it was Henrik that was talking about the sweet spots. Analog is one big sonic sweet spot, okay, because it plays in the areas where our ears are naturally happy, right? So you can't. It's hard to make a bad analog sound, truly. But that's because you're fixed in so many areas, right? FM's a whole different ballgame, and it is multitude. It's every point in between. So you have to pick your points. The great news is you have all those points in the first place, but the harder part is if you go in blindly, going from sweet spot A to sweet spot B, which is a smooth turn of two knobs in analog, you find all the quantum realms in between.
That's why I love it.
You know what I think the difference is because I'm looking at Manny at your Hydrasynth Deluxe, and I've got mine sitting right here, is that it's a little bit different where you start off with your analog modeled oscillators or wavetables or whatever, and then the FM after the fact is a mutant.
Right.
It's a different concept, and I think it really works.
Yeah. Well, so that's really interesting, because most people that know me know my absolute favorite platform is the one you can't see in front of me, is my SY99. And that's where they started playing with non-sinusoidal things, right? And that's where things get really cool, but again, a whole other magnitude, because since we know the FM/PM algorithm generates so much harmonics based on what your modulator and carriers are, when you start bringing more than one harmonic in at a time with an analog waveform, that's when things get even more interesting, let's say. Because on one hand, the controllability becomes less, because you have a very narrow range of what you can do before it goes to noise. But on the other hand, a whole lot of other things become possible, because you're starting with structures that are, again, inherently complex. So, when you're doing the mutants on the Hydrasynth, little bits can do a lot, unless you want to do it truly as a 4-op FM type of deal, right? But the thing I like about it is that, you can do something on a Hydra, which is as classic as this. But you can do something on the SY that's as nice as this.
A little too hot.
Sorry about that.
That's fine by me.
But, so that's just like the whole advantages and differences of the system. What's nice about the platform is once you learn, you have 4 waveforms for oscillators. Just in FM, you got to memorize 400 waveforms and oscillators. So, anyway, but I'm done hijacking. By the way, I have to say two things here. two things here. You need to put Scott and Robbie on their own side of the screen because their studios are far too organized compared to the rest of us.
Oh yeah.
And you can't see mine.
What are you saying?
It's just an illusion.
I had been.
I
meaning
rebuilt
to.
this studio only just a few months ago, so
Yeah.
it hasn't devolved yet.
It hasn't evolved yet. Yeah. Because I'm looking at Chris's and I'm going, yeah, that's how mine is on an average day. Yeah, exactly. So anyway.
And plus, you can't see that side of the room. There's purposefully no cameras pointing that direction.
Well, again, this is my good side of the room.
Don't look behind the curtain.
Yeah.
I do have a confession. I do have a confession.
What's that?
There is more. There is more of the room. It's not super impressive, but there is.
Oh, you got.
There's more stuff there and cable trees and stuff like that. So we've got a bit more modular.
Oh, come on, just stop it.
Got
You're
some
making me
boutiques.
look
We've
bad
got
now.
Volca Beats. We've got wood panels for Volca Beats and all these projects that I haven't been in yet. And all the boxes. That's okay. That keeping the boxes, I do think that is a problem.
Oh, I do that. But mine are all downstairs in the garage, much to my wife's.
Yeah, mine's in the attic.
Right, resume to our normal programming.
There
Back
you
to
go.
normal programming.
Chris, what was the phrase you used again when you said you racked your gear? You said it's a something project. You had taken some.
Sorry, I can't remember.
You're talking about. I guess it was your.
Was it my 19-inch rack, or are you talking?
Yeah,
about
there's something. Yeah. You'd racked one of your pieces of gear. You put the encoder on it.
Oh, yeah, pimped it.
Yeah.
Did I say I pimped it? I don't know.
No, I don't know.
Modularized it.
You had to read. Yeah. I want to do.
I'll tell you what. I'll look back at the stream and I'll tell you when it comes out. What I said.
I thought it was a great phrase
I've
because
done that.
I've been trying to find a way to do that with an SY99, and I'm not coming up with a good way.
Yes, modding is really what I think it's known of in the industry, but in the sort of synth community. But it's really just repackaging. It's a bit like if you're basically trying to cram circuit boards in a different space, size of a module. You know, depending on what your user interface is, that kind of dictates the panel size of your 19 rack mat that you got to go for. That dictates the sort of the beginning. Quite often, your modules, you really want quite a large front panel because there's quite often some user interface there that you do need to get access to. And that usually then gives you quite a bit of room inside your case. It's just a matter of deciding whether you want to go very deep or whether you want to go shallow. Because traditionally, 19-inch racks go very deep. If you're in the computer IT world, the stuff I've worked with in banking, for example, and bank EFT systems, the full depth of a rack is, I think, 600 millimeters. It's 2 feet. Yeah,
Wow.
Stuff goes back that far. Goes back that far. Sometimes and other times they just use the space for air conditioning. You know, you circulate the air, and you need to put more, telephone lines in, or power cables, or power management, or something. Yeah. So traditionally, from the Euro rack world, which came, from the 19-inch rack world, evolved from sort of the sort of instrumentation, scientific instrumentation world. It was quite a bit of depth because, of course, you were dealing with valves and stuff like that, and big ginormous capacitors and radio broadcast equipment back in the sort of valve age. So that's where it started from. And, it's been adapted for music. So now, 19-inch, the sideways standard has remained, the unit sizes have remained, but the depth has changed quite a lot. So just depending on what kind of front panel size you have, it determines how much you have to sort of pack circuit boards in. In the Pod 800's case, because I was really quite particular about fitting it in that one unit size, I knew the display was going to fit. I knew that the plastic bezel over the display where all the legending is and all the good sort of 80s kitsch sign of, art design was there. I knew that I could fit that in unit rack mount. And once I did that, kind of everything else had to follow that. So that meant I had to design a new keyboard for it. I had to move the volume knob from the back to the front, things like that.
Right.
And then I will admit that things got a bit extreme because things like the mod wheel had to be not just removed, it had to be extricated, because the mod wheel's variable resistors, the resistors, were integral to the tuning circuit. So part of the tuning circuit goes to the mod wheel and then comes back. So you just go and the whole thing goes out of tune. I actually had to work out what was going on, work out what I needed, and design a little miniature circuit board that was the sort of mod wheel faker, and put that in there. And there are a few other boards that had to be stacked, in a different sort of stood off from each other, because normally they would be flat in the original Poly 800, but you had to put them sort of slightly overlapping. So that just meant you had to get kind of creative, which is fine when you're evolving a design like mine, because that design did not start that way. It's gone through about 3 different redesigns. That's the second keyboard. That's the third case. The first case it was in, this is just, I should probably not admit this, it was cardboard. Not a fire hazard at all. But
CAD, cardboard aided design.
Exactly.
I'll go one better. The SH101, its tuning is connected to the power switch. So the most common cause of SH101s going out of tune is a dirty power switch.
Yeah. Kit says that all the time. It's the first thing that he checks.
The Poly 800, the power switch and the volume knob integrated.
Yeah, same
It's
thing.
a very much more kind of common thing to do in electronics in general, particularly radios. Think of a radio.
Yeah.
But yeah, tuning knob, that's novel. Still, Japanese, they come up with interesting ideas.
Yeah, see, that's the quandary, because the front panel layout of the SY99, if you split it in half and stack it, it's about 8 rack spaces, which is huge. Now, unfortunately, Yamaha has essentially the same OS, more or less, in the TG77 in a different interface, but there's too many differences. I can't even imagine hacking the code, so you're sort of stuck with a repackage. But on the bright side, in the standard rack, if you go with an 8-unit front panel, you could actually get, if putting the boards front to back, side by side, you could get 4 SY99 electronics in one space.
Yeah, it's surprising sometimes how much the actual main boards, how much empty space there is inside some of our keyboards and some of our modules.
Yeah.
I have to wonder whether that plays a part in air cooling. How many synths don't have fans in them? Is it because they were very spacious with the amount of room? Right. What do we do these days? We try to cram everything into as much of a small space as possible.
Desktop.
And then we say, we're going to need cooling systems.
Yeah.
Back then, they didn't have to worry about it.
The only gear that I have in here that has a fan, oddly enough, is one of the oldest pieces, which is my K2000.
Yeah, I remember the K2000 fan. That you could hear it, but when you approached it before, you could hear the keyboard.
You want fans? I'll give you Fairlight.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That's it.
They're structural components, right, Robbie?
Yeah. Literally, I've spoken to customers and they've said, so when I buy this thing, where should I put it? I said, anywhere but the place that you make music. Get long cables, drill holes, put it in another room, get it out, it's
on a different room than the speakers.
Yeah. I mean, what is there in Series 3? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's about 11 fans on a Series 3.
What?
Wow.
Yeah.
And
there's 8 in the
all
bass.
Noisy?
Yeah. Unless obviously the originals are, but nowadays we put like Noctua F9s and
one more fan and it would have been an early drone.
It would take off. It
would take off.
The ultimate drone.
Yeah.
My Open Labs Miko has a fair amount of fan noise on it. So.
Yeah, I bet that does. Yeah.
Manny, just thinking about your SY77 problem, would it be an option at all to angle the front panel or angle the display to make it fit? I gather it's going to be viewing angle problems.
Well, part of it's that. The newer displays that I've upgraded them with, I can futz with that a lot, so it's less of that. It's more how much of a repackaging of PCB components do you want to do? Because when you look at the internals of these things, Yamaha kind of did a good job making them efficiently packaged, which means repackaging it becomes that much more difficult. You'd have to take a part off, you'd have to run, wires and separate crap from A to B to do things like that. So that's where you run into the trouble.
Yeah, I'd run off pretty far away from modifying circuit boards and anything in that era and beyond. It's just too hard. Tracks are too small, so easy to damage stuff, so easy to cause interference where it was designed not to have interference.
Right.
It gets really tricky down there. I meant more literally if you could tilt the whole sort of front panel so that it sort of comes out on an angle.
Right, to reduce the size.
I've seen a few modules that did used to do that kind of thing, or that's how they solved the problem of creating a rack mount version of a large synth with a large display. They tilted it. I don't know how successful it was as a product, but
right,
and whether that influences usability. So it's just something maybe.
As you had, don't push it. It might happen.
Yeah.
I almost had a water-cooled synth last week.
Yeah.
I thought it was orange cooled.
Well, yeah, quite.
I have to say, I did feel for you, Robbie.
Yeah.
I really felt for you, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know, I noticed after the show finished, I went downstairs and my voice was hoarse.
Yep.
Because I shouted obscenities so much and so loudly when that was all happening. I thought, why have I got a sore throat? Why do I sound a bit like Rod Stewart? Oh, yeah.
So if there's any doubt you're actually Italian, you dismissed it all in that moment.
In that, yeah, it was all coming. Every language, hand gestures, the lot. It was all there,
including
it was crazy, but yeah, we survived.
Oh, good. No damage at all.
No damage at all, apart from my pride and ego.
Oh yeah.
Nothing.
Welcome to the club.
Close call.
Yeah. No, luckily it wasn't. I say, luckily it wasn't any of this stuff because that would have been really bad. But it was just.
I thought the orange juice would have been bad enough.
Put it away. Put it away. Now, put it down.
Weak orange squash.
Isn't Coca-Cola meant to be the worst?
It is the worst.
In the gigging days that you spilt a Coke on your keyboard and it was toast.
That was it.
Between the sugar and the acid.
Yeah.
Don't discount the acid.
That's how I understood it.
Carbonic acid.
I wonder how many synth repairers have been faced with that. Oh no, the Coke spillage. Right, time to order a replacement board.
I'm the guy that poured a beer down a Moog Prodigy once on purpose because it was on fire on stage.
Oh. Well, that's a good excuse. That's an excellent.
Between the devil and the deep
I applaud that.
Yeah.
I remember we did a concert where someone held a bottle of beer down into one of our synths, and we turned it around, and the rest of the concert we played it upright.
Draining. Did it work? Did it manage?
It worked, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Let it drain. Let it drain.
Get me 2 kilos of rice, stat.
There's a bunch of people in the chat talking about heat and fans and synths, and I just thought I'd share my image here. This is an infrared image I took of my Poly 6. And the chips on the bottom are the oscillators. The hot ones in the middle are the envelope generators, and the ones on the top are the filters. And that's on the voice board.
Wow.
That was making all the lift off.
So this is why you need to let your analog synth warm up before it comes into tune.
Yeah.
And cool down afterwards. But it's still better than having to deal with vacuum tube technology.
For sure. Yep.
Speaking of warming up, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit here for everyone out in the Fahrenheit world. 38 degrees.
I think it's got
Your
-2
summer out there,
here.
isn't it?
No, it's snowing here today.
Australia. Oh, lovely.
Lucky you.
It's 2 degrees Celsius outside at the
It's
moment.
near freezing here right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in winter here, but Los Angeles, where I am and where Andy is, 100 typical summer stuff. So we feel for you because we feel it every year.
Rob?
Yeah, I've got the aircon on, so I don't really feel it at all. I know Rance's the same.
Well, short. Can you tell something about yourself, Manny?
Shortly, can I tell myself about myself?
Yeah, short.
Let's see. Been doing this a long time. What do I like about doing it? My programming philosophy is break it first. Meaning, I don't want to use it the obvious way. So I want to see what it does in all the nooks and crannies. So I dive into the nether reaches of these machines. What's interesting is you find cool stuff. What's interesting is it's exceedingly good for OS debugging. And half the reason I still work for the people I work for is because I am the bug collector extraordinaire for bad luck, karma, or whatever.
Manny breaks shit.
I break shit.
The industry needs people like you, and I salute you.
Oh, yeah.
So
We are left field thinking.
yeah. So my heyday was from the late '80s through the early 2000s. Took a sabbatical to work on the rest of my real life and family, and then when Yamaha came back with FM stuff, I sort of came out of sabbatical. And it's been a great gear renaissance since then, because look at all this stuff that we didn't have 5 years ago. Essence FM, who would have thought? Third Wave, your Hydra synths. I mean, Hydra synth, I think, is the bomb. There's an Iridium here. It's my most favorite, least used synth. But we got stuff now that's ridiculous. Ridiculous.
I agree.
You know?
Yeah.
Good time to be in
kind of
synths.
Funny question.
It is real renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real renaissance.
What's the question?
It's tongue-in-cheek, so please excuse me.
Oh, no worries.
That philosophy about break it first, where did the Behringer 2600 broke? I mean, just...
Well, the interesting thing is, it because it's analog, there's some fun stuff that you can do when you overdrive the inputs intentionally, whether it's the voltage or the audio stuff. But again, that gives you some behaviors that you don't expect. I think how with the analog gear, sometimes when you do these circuits, sometimes the voltage summing goes wanky. But part of the reason why I have it, I have that for a very specific reason, is that I couldn't get the Korg frickin' reissue. And the 2600 is one of my synths of my youth, kind of thing.
One.
I did not have one. I have a very privileged access to gear when I was young and in high school, because very dear friends with a top flight LA studio and jazz musician. Who
There's a great podcast about that.
Yes, there is. So I was very spoiled. I got to you name it. He had it. Anyway, so it was just about recapturing that. And as you can see with all the other Behringer gear I had here, my midlife crisis part was I wanted to get all the wall of Moog and ARP that made me get into certain areas of electronic music with like Tangerine Dream and such. But to your point, they also have a space that sometimes I just want to twiddle knobs and see what falls out and not get distracted by what I tripped over, because when I'm in my other platforms, you have to be very focused. Like if I'm doing a preset bank, I can't take a distraction like, oh, that was cool. I still got to do my X number of things that are on the spec, so it's,
I get it.
Just flavors.
No, sure.
When you do preset banks, what name are you using?
Well, I don't sell anything at the moment. I work directly with, sorry, Robbie, with manufacturers historically. I mean, since SoundSource closed down way back in the day, I haven't done that. Right now I'm exclusively doing stuff for Yamaha. as most people know. I have irons in the fire to do this with other companies, but just projects haven't hit fruition. Although there might be something coming out of a French company very soon that has some of my work in it. That kind of thing.
Can we hear any of yours in the montage?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice.
Oh
You
yeah.
want Manny's work? Here you go. Here's a collection.
Nice.
Now you said
of
that you're working on something from a French company, like we did with Chris and Scott. Can you tell what's on your table?
What's on my table?
Yeah, you probably can't.
No, I obviously cannot.
But it's good.
But
It's nice
there's
to try and ask.
yeah. The French thing is interesting and kind of what you expect, but not. I mean, it's been shown, but it's quirky in a very neat way. There's going to be some people that are going to go, I've been wanting for that forever, and it's going to be
Freak.
a bunch of people are going to be like, what? And that's cool because the older I get, I am appreciating niche pieces, because I think if you try to do everything, you suffer from beige syndrome. So I like the fact that something that does something well. So yeah, but no, it's gonna be cool. There's other things that I am hopeful will be out at NAMM. We shall see.
I've got one as well, but one of the ones that I can't talk about, but it will be coming out soon, and when it does, people are going to be happy.
Yeah, very nice and cool.
Let's
Hold on
go
to the credit
to
cards.
Bank account.
let's go to Ian.
Okay.
We know a lot about you, but still some don't. So
Okay.
tell us something about
ones.
Tell you something about myself. All right, okay. Potted history as quick as I can. Started playing bass at 14. Was rubbish. Was told by the band that I joined that I should play keyboards.
What?
So Eddie. So went out and bought.
How does that compute?
Well, the guitarist. There was two guitarists in the band. One of the guitarists was obviously a better bass player than I was.
Okay.
So and luckily I lived. My father was what's called in England. It's called a club steward in what was called a workman's club. It's like a bar manager. And in this club, they had a great big Hammond B3, I think it was, with Leslie. So I learned to play on that, really. So I played organ first. Never really bothered playing bass pedals. But went out and bought myself a little, I think it was a Gem organ, was the first thing that I bought. It wasn't very good, but it was good enough for the band that we were playing in. So moved up, bought my first synthesizer, which was a Korg 700. That's why just behind me there's a Korg 700, not my original, but and I had Kruma Roadrunner electric piano. So for a long time I played with those. Got my first record deal in about my first and only record deal really in about 1980. Joined a band who were just doing their first album. Wasn't very successful, but it was quite fun for a while, for about 6 or 8 months, where we were sort of we were the hot property in Yorkshire, in England. That all sort of fell apart, and I sort of can't continue. I went back to my proper job, or doing jobs really. And sort of music for a long time became a sort of part-time hobby until probably it was towards the end of the 80s. I joined what was called a covers band playing nightclubs and places like that, and that became a full-time job. And I did that for probably about 3 or 4 years. We went through a number of singers in that time with the band, but the core musicians stayed together. And we were out sort of 4 or 5 nights a week, earning, this was, like I say, late 80s, early 90s, earning good money. You know, we'd be out then, it was £300-400 a night, something like that, which obviously in that time was great, really. We could more or less live on it.
It's great now.
Yeah, well, it is. That's the thing. It is great now, yeah. So I did that for a while. Then the band sort of folded. I carried on playing and working with clubs for a while, doing in a duo. So we earned more money together, but obviously so you'd go for £200 and you'd be paid. You'd get £100 each a night, that type of thing. By this time, well, all through this period, I was married with my wife Jane, and we spent the first few years of our lives actually sort of seeing each other when I wasn't gigging and Jane wasn't working, you know. But when my first son came along, I decided to stop gigging for quite a while, and I stopped gigging for probably about 4 or 5 years, till both my sons were born, and you know I had a home. I never stopped playing music. I always had that time I had a 4-track, and I just used to noodle stuff at home, doing demos and stuff like that. But you know, occasionally they saw the light of day, really, you know. And what did I do after that? I went and got a job. I set up a company. I set up a hi-fi company because I'd worked in hi-fi for a few years before going professional with the band, and I set up a hi-fi business, selling some musical instruments as well. We had the agency for Fender guitars at the time and things like that. We didn't at that point sell any synthesizers. But so I ran that for 10 years, got bored really with it. I'm still sort of playing in local bands and things like that. I then went and for 18 years, I went and taught in education, which was a bit of a career change. I became a lecturer at the York University, which is sort of 20 miles down the road, and I taught nurses to use computers. Having gone back and studied, within all that time, I did a degree in computing, then I did a master's in education with applying software, and then for fun, probably about 15 years ago, I went back and did a music technology master's, you know. So did that for 18 years, playing in bands, and then took a redundancy package and bought a music shop in our local town. Ran that for 8 years, and then we sold that just before the pandemic. Now, sadly, the guy we sold it to, he closed it, and he didn't actually need to close it, but he decided that he wanted to do something else. So sadly, our little local town lost its music shop, you know, and that's pretty much my potted history. You know, there's a few other things along the way, really, you know, but that's pretty much where we're up to now. I mean, along the way, I've put out my own albums. You know, Sinners Music, which is the company that I still run, which was the parent company of the music shop we took, has still got a record label, and occasionally I put stuff out on that. I didn't do the last couple of years. 2019 was the last time I put an album out. I occasionally put albums out for other people, but they have to be people I know and like. I don't deal with arseholes. I've been through that too many times, you know. So I mean, and I have been asked to work with bands that, and actually, you part of it's about trust, part of it's about getting on with the people that you're actually working with. Now, if I go into a relationship with a band from a record company point of view, and it's usually 50-50 or that type of thing, I'm tied into a long-term relationship with that band. I've got to get on with the people that, you know. So there was one band that will remain nameless where I actually they asked me to put their album out, and I'd done some work for them and got paid for it, from some production work. And I just decided that I don't really want to get into too many egos in that particular band, you know.
Well,
and they weren't a famous band either. They were just, you know. Sorry, go on.
You need to get along with those people for that long-term
exactly
relationship,
yeah.
or get shit tons of money out of it.
Yeah, there wasn't that much money in it.
Exactly.
And,
So no,
and
Not
it
gonna
was
happen.
it was really about the fact that I like nice people these days. I'm at that point in my age. I'm knocking on a bit, so I'm at that point in my life where I don't need to.
exactly.
I mean, when I was working in university, and some of my colleagues at the university, you didn't get on with, but you had to make it professional. You had to get on with them because you're getting paid.
Yep.
That I'm not at that situation now. I don't have to worry about the salary that's coming in every month.
I
So,
like the way another YouTuber put it about relationships. I think he's a hired gun mostly, a session musician or two hired for the tour musician, and it says that it's basically any relationship within the music business is based on three pillars, which is basically the hang, the musicianship, or the money. If you get 2 out of 3, go for it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if you're only getting any one of them, is not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that's the only time I sort of ever turned anybody down because of the relationship with it was, and it wasn't the whole band. I'm still friends with the drummer. It was mainly, shall we say, 1 or 2 other members of the band.
It was
Where
the
where
lead
ego.
singer. Come on, we all
All
know
right,
it was
all right,
the
all
lead
right,
singer.
all right. It was the lead singer. It was the lead singer.
They've
Yeah.
always got the biggest.
Oh, you mean
it
the
was
ego
the lead
trip
singer.
guy?
Yeah.
Okay. It's funny, Rob. I keep thinking you're freezed, so either you are using your mouse or pouring your beer all the time. I'm not sure. but you're sitting in the same position very often. And I
I'm
could
just listening,
think it's the
listening
beer.
intently. I'm just listening intently to all the stories.
Okay. Synth Addict. We haven't talked to you today, Andy. You haven't
Oh
said a
God!
word.
Don't start him. Oh jeez, we'll be here all night.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
I can mute him. I can
Goes
mute him.
on and on and on.
Hi,
I have
Andy.
nothing to say.
I had a good go.
Love you,
I had a
Andy.
good go at rambling.
I know. No, I had a hell of a night last night with work and some other shit, so I didn't get any sleep.
You were
really,
out
so.
boozing and snorting anything.
I
that
did
was
drink
coming
for a
around.
while with my brother. That's true, but then I also had work to do. So don't combine the two if you can help it. But no, I was meaning to get some actual stuff done, and I didn't. So, and then I'm late for this. So, good times.
Okay.
I'm waiting. I'm listening with one ear because FedEx is coming with my TD-17 any minute. So, I can't wait.
Okay. We talked about what's on the table and shelves. What's on yours, Ian?
Well, at the moment, literally before I came on, I had you on the background, but I've been working on, I'm doing 3 tracks on an album that I've been asked to do. And it's actually, I don't know whether you've got lots of what's called the electronic open mic night. It's going on over in the rest of Europe, but here, obviously here in the UK, so it's quite a big thing. I played at one in November, and the guy that actually organised the night is putting that out as an album. So he sent me the recordings off the desk, but I'd also I'd recorded it at the same night. So I've just been checking that, sorting out, adding a little bit of reverb, and then I'm about to send that back to him later. So that'll come out probably back end of next month, maybe March, something like that. I am working on an album of my own solo electronic stuff, which is sort of more experimental than anything else. That should be out by probably towards the end of the year, I think, by the time it's finished. I've got probably 6 or 7 tracks, but I keep coming back to them, and none of them are mixed yet. But I work very slowly on my own stuff, and other things sort of start to get in the way, really, I usually, this is the year that I will, every 2 years I work on a dance production for a customer that I've worked with a long, long time. And I'm at some point in the year I'll get a call from her saying we need to do it first. I think it's probably used about September, October time. So that's I'm aware that will be on the horizon at some point in the future. Apart from that, I've just been told today that my son's getting. Well, I knew he was getting married. My youngest son's getting married, and he's asked me to. He's asked me to play. I'm playing at my own son's wedding, just piano, for 40 minutes. I've got to do a 40, and so I need to sort of come up with something that's.
No pressure.
There's got to be a couple of Irish tunes in there somehow. But I'm doing the lounge cocktail thing, which is something I've never done before, so that'll be quite interesting. So I'm going to start preparing that now. It won't be till October, November time. But I better start looking at it now.
They're getting ready for November already. It's the fast one.
Sorry, say again.
They're getting ready for November already, which is
close. I mean,
he's
just they haven't given us a date. He's just said that it's going to be in London. We know that. And he said, we were going to get a piano player, but he said, did you want to do it? And I said, well, I'm cheaper than anybody else because I'm free. So, and I'm going to be there and I don't have to take any gear. I could just turn up and play the piano. So, I thought it's only for half an hour after the reception type thing.
In your brain, it's only for an hour. For me, it's a whole hour of piano playing. Come on.
I mean, some of it will be improvised because that'll happen.
So Ian is lounge style. You're going to be doing crowd work like, hey, you, hey.
No, I'm just going to sit there with a nice glass of champagne and noodle away for an hour, I think. But I'll have to rehearse it, I'm sure.
Okay. I was actually asking about what's on your table, not what's planned.
Okay. What's on the table?
But it's okay. It was great to hear. So what's on your table?
What is on my table?
More important, are you gonna get the
That's always on my table at the moment since I bought it just before Christmas. And actually, my Novation
Wagyu says
circuit.
pies and peas.
Say again, Rob.
Wagyu says pies and peas.
Pies and peas. Yeah. The other thing that's on my table is I have a Vox guitar pedal which has come back for repair and actually isn't faulty.
Which one?
It's this one. Let me just unplug it. It's a nice little thing actually, but the guy says it's faulty. Won't work with it. Only works on batteries. I've been using it for the last 3 days. Soak testing it really, making sure that the damn thing works. And
how nice does it record?
I have never recorded it actually. Okay. The output on it is obviously it's a mono stereo, so you can use a pair of stereo headphones for the effects. But it sounds really nice on a pair of headphones.
Okay.
I
had an early generation. I had the 1000, the AG 1000.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, we've never had a Vox or a Korg. We've been a Vox Korg dealer for probably since we had to start the shop. So that was 12 years, right? We had it for 8 years. Sold it a couple of years ago. We've never had a piece of Vox equipment back till this. That's what surprised me, that this was apparently faulty. But I'm going to play with it a bit more tomorrow, then send me a message on Monday and say, look, it's not faulty. What do you want to do about it?
It really surprised me about the Op6 recall, because all experience I've ever had with Korg, that's why I'm kind of a fan of Korg. It's like, there's rock solid, they're dependable, they work.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, in 12 years, we've had two pieces of equipment, two synths that have gone wrong. One of them was we had the wave drum. We had a wave drum go wrong, and we had microkorg, but not the original microkorg. It was one of the offshoots.
Okay.
But to be fair about the Op6 recall, I don't think it was any fault of Korg. I think it was a supplier issue.
I'm not.
Yeah. And obviously that was something that only happened in the States.
It shocked me at first.
That's true.
Didn't happen over
that
here.
Never happens.
Manny, did you get your screen sorted in the end?
Yes, it did. I think I overstated it in comments somewhere else. It took 3.5 months for them to get a replacement screen out, but it finally came. Hey, well, not like I didn't have any other gear to work on.
That's the secret, isn't it? Buy enough gear so that when you need to return things for repair, you're not missing it.
Yeah.
Or two,
It's just on the shelf, Get to
Well,
it later.
yeah, no, it's oh gosh, it's bad enough with hardware, and it's what 4 orders of magnitude worse when you buy soft synths, right?
Yes.
Let's not get into that. Yeah, but here's a
Hey,
good
in fact,
question.
I have a question for Rob, actually, while we're at because I haven't seen you for such a long time, Rob.
I know.
And I did watch. I wasn't in the chat last night because I was out. I'm sorry, but I did. I watched it this morning. I watched PSN this morning, which was it was a good show. Mini Freak.
Aye.
Should I buy? Because I can get the app for $49. Should I get that, or should I go and get the hardware? Because I've just sold some. I mean, I'm not going to get the hardware anytime soon, but this year, I've just sold a single that a band I played with for £300. No. So that £300 could go towards a Mini Freak.
Yeah. I have to say, having experienced the hardware before the software, that I fell in love with the hardware, the fact that, it's got knobs and stuff and you can get into it. And the software, once that dropped, for Mini Freak hardware owners, just made it, I could stick the Mini Freak V on my laptop and just mess around with that. And then when I come back, it's, I can immediately translate it, it just works. But also, the hardware makes for a good controller of the software if you want to go that route. It's an slightly expensive controller, I suppose. But they both sound as good as each other. The modelling on the filters is really good.
I think it's identical except for the analog filter.
Exactly, and they're modelled so very well that you just can't tell.
I have the software and I've tried the hardware, but I'm really not a fan of mini keys. But the software seems to be well laid out, and it's not like where the wave state has the software, and I will actually go to the software to program the wave state because programming the wave state on the hardware is an exercise in pain.
But if you buy the hardware, the software is free.
Yes. Exactly.
Right.
So,
yes.
I mean, if I didn't have V Collection, because obviously that's why I get it for £49, $49. Is it dollars or euros? Anyway, whichever it is.
It's actually if you have any Arturia product.
Oh, is it? Oh, well, I would have got it anyway then.
So that's only until I think February 4th. So anybody watching this, if you have an Arturia product and you want it, because after the 4th, it's back to $200. I
mean, I'm thinking towards. I'm a hardware guy rather than software.
And I think also this sounds really weird, and it's not a reason to buy the hardware at all. But when you have the hardware in front of you and you start playing it and you hear what it's doing, it's way it sounds way bigger than the hardware. It sounds it doesn't sound as you'd expect it. It sounds so much better. It's.
I'm not sure it's sounding better, but I think it feels better.
Right.
So the audio circuitry doesn't make a difference?
Not really.
No. Usually that's the thing, right? Audio circuitry makes a huge difference in most things.
The Mini Freak is a digital synth, and so what's coming out of the back of that is what will come out of the virtual back of a plug-in. It's and the mini keys aren't traditional mini keys. What do they call them? MIDI keys. They're sort of a little bit wider, and it's a really nice keyboard as well. The aftertouch is really, and it's even got a felt strip at the back. So it doesn't. It has a build quality to it. It's quite a, for what it is, it has heft.
I mean, I don't have a problem with mini keys.
There is this is the one other thing that I would say to anyone that's kind of like, do you remember when they brought out the Micro Freak, and then I forget how long after it was they introduced the Micro Freak Vocoder edition, and for a little bit more money you could buy the Micro Freak and you'd get the gooseneck mic, but essentially all of those features were already in the hardware. We just updated the firmware, and then you could either use their microphone or any microphone. So when the Mini Freak first came out, I don't know if I can actually. Let me see if I can unplug.
This is the mysterious holes on the back, right, Rob?
The mysterious holes on the back. So if I can just let me see if I can do this. So on the back there, you've got you've got this kind of ventilation grill. But can you see that there are 3 holes?
Yeah.
This is slightly larger than the rest. Let me just bring that in.
The Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, there you go.
I say guitar.
Yeah, same.
They are all threaded.
Ooh,
They're threaded. There's something going in there.
I call guitar.
So
That's what Rob was saying.
So yeah, that was I thought, because that's to the left. I think mod grip a la SH101. But there's something going on. So maybe that will give the hardware just that little. Because what I've been really surprised about was I knew the software was gonna go public as a standalone item in its own right. I didn't know how soon, and I was taken by surprise at how soon after the release of the hardware that they said, "Hey everyone, if you want a Mini Freak, here's a software version, and it's only this much money." And I'm thinking, why are you cannibalizing your hardware sales there? That seems like an odd business decision. But clearly, Arturia know what they're doing. They're not silly.
I think it's just riding a wave.
Yeah, and I think they've probably made the right choice. I'm certainly no expert, but there has to be something that makes that investment of $5. Well, I think RRP is $599, but I think you can get it for like $529 somewhere.
Yeah, I saw it at 523 was the cheapest I've seen in the
so
UK. Yeah,
there has to be
and I'll get the
something
VAT
that
back
gives
as well.
it the edge.
So.
Yeah, there has to be something that gives the hardware the edge. That's more than just having a keyboard and some knobs to twiddle, and I think that ability. But then saying that, if they're going to add some kind of sound manipulation or generation facility in the synth, that something that you bolt on the back, then you can only imagine that maybe they're going to do that in the software too. But if it is going to be a keytar, I mean, it's not a bad idea. I think I call keytar first off. I'm going to stick by that.
Are the keys the same size as the Yamaha ones, the ones that you can buy now, like the Mikuni one? The Miku
I don't
one.
know. I've only ever seen like refaces, which would be the same sort of keys. I've only seen them.
The red with the roundish.
Got the
headstock.
SHS 10.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I made some of them.
Abomination. Yeah.
But is that the same kind of size?
I don't know.
keys?
I've never seen an SHS 10.
They're kind of smaller.
These are a little bigger. They're a little bigger than those that you would have gotten. This is obviously my generation, the KX5. They're a little wider. They're not. They're probably the same length, but they're
Kind of like the Korg Slim keys.
I'm going to say they sound like because I've got a microstation called Microstation, and that's got these slim keys, but they are slightly fatter than say the mini Korg, micro Korg. Sorry.
They're just a little
how
wider.
wide are the black keys? I know on the Reface, the key beds on those, that's the only mini key I've ever really liked, because the black keys are thin enough that you can actually get your fingers up.
In
to
between.
play in there.
The minis seem to be on par with the Reface from what I remember playing on the Mini at Synthplex. It seemed the touch was almost as good, and the dimensions were similar. Rob, to my recollection, and I could take it out of the box, but the KX5 has short keys but normal width.
It has
Oh, are
short
they?
keys, yeah.
Are they? I thought they
Yeah,
were. I thought
no,
they were
they're full.
thin.
They're full width.
So there you go. What do I know?
About
I still haven't got one. It's still on my list, and I know where there is.
Oh
one
my
that's sitting
gosh!
gathered.
You don't
I know,
have a
right?
KX5?
Better catch up, Robbie. I have 2 of them. So
Well, yes,
there
I
you
went over. Yes.
And now
No, I was at David Vorhaus's place, and we sat there, and it's before we went up to his studio, and he's got a big David Vorhaus started playing double bass. That was his original instrument. And sitting next to his double bass, gathering copious amounts of dust and probably fruity flavored smoke, was a silver KX5. And I was just like, looking at it, I was thinking, oh, please, David, tell me you don't use that anymore, and I can tell you.
So, Robbie, you have to get one, because if you have a KX5 and your TX816, then you can recreate the FM synth version of Marty McFly blowing up the speaker in Doc Brown's lab at the opening of Back to the Future.
There you go. There's a reason right there.
So, just back to David Vorhaus for a sec. He invented some sort of strange instrument, didn't he?
He's invented a few. The kaleidophone, which is
kaleidophone. Did he show you it?
Yeah, he's got.
It sounds amazing.
He showed me the original,
that's the
which
guy.
he built in the sort of 70s. And then he's since developed it, and it's got a shorter length to it, but it's still like half of a drain pipe, just sliced down the middle. And then he's got these carbon strips that conductive strips, and all he's really done is kind of beefed up the MIDI implementation over the years, but the basic principle of the kaleidophone. And he's still, I've got some pictures of him playing his latest iteration of it. And he still has this kind of like holster that when he stands playing it, it looks, it's incredibly phallic. And I don't believe for a second that wasn't deliberate.
I'm sure it was.
And he's doing this, and it's an amazing thing when he plays it. But the really amazing thing that he invented was the Maniac, which is an acronym for, I cannot remember. He clearly, thought of this in some LCD, in LED. Sorry?
MIDI, Android, not whatever.
No, it's something multi-phasic, analog, something. It's bonkers, and he was clearly tripping on something when he came up with that. But it's a polyrhythmic, polyphonic sequencer. So you set it off, and every cycle changes ever so slightly, and it just keeps going and going and going, and just goes off and does these wonderful things.
So basically, a wet dream for every Eurorack user.
Yeah, it's just this huge box, and it's still got the original Dymo. Remember the Dymos when it actually pressed into the plastic? It's still got those little labels on it. And he's since recreated it, all of that and more, apparently, in Reactor. So he has a Windows 10 tablet running Reactor. And that's when he goes out live, because he's still playing as White Noise live. Him and Mike go out, and he has this thing, which is, he still calls it the Maniac, but it's just like it does all of these wonderful things. He does it all in Reactor. But yeah, absolute genius, that man.
The first one you mentioned, is it still using only one strip?
No, it's 4 strips.
Now it's 4 strips.
4 strips. Just it's because he originally trained as a double bass player. Or whatever you want to call it, and it's 4, so it's just 4 strips, and the original one was linked up to a VCS3 serial number 0001, which is which he still has in his studio, which I've got photos of. It's amazing.
Embedded some part out.
But he also has a Korg Wave Station keyboard with one of those gloves, and the glove plugs into the MIDI. And he just does things with his hands, and it affects the wave station.
To control CCs.
Yeah, he's done some amazing stuff. But then in that studio, so he's got a couple of massive speakers. I don't know where they look like Electone speakers. Those huge things that they used to ship with. And on top of one of those is a Fairlight Series 1 monitor that's not connected to anything. And I said, where's the rest of your Fairlight? Because David actually owns the very first Fairlight that came into the UK. So when Peter Gabriel started Psycho Systems, he imported them, and David got word of this, went to see Peter at Real World, or whatever it was again before it was Real World, and saw this thing and said, I need one of these. And because he was already friends with Peter Vogel, he said, I want one, can you do me a deal? And so Peter Vogel did him a deal on that first one that came in. So basically it was Peter Gabriel's Series 1, and then he had it. So I said, where is it? Where is this fabled number 1 thing? And he said, it's over there somewhere. And over there somewhere, underneath a PPG Wave 2, a DX7, and something else, was this Fairlight Series 1. And I said, is it all connected? And he said, no, I haven't used it for years. Because he used to do loads of KPM albums, those kind of library music albums with just the Fairlight. No, he doesn't use it at all. But he's got this. It's just an incredible collection of just sometimes really mundane stuff. There's a DX7. He's got 2 TX7s, and you know how they're
the wedge
shapes. So he's got them at opposite ends, and then sitting on top of all this other stuff, and these TX7s, and he's got ASR 10s, and he's got wave stations, and
it's a book stop and it's a synthesizer.
It really does look like this elaborate book stop.
In my book, that's the sign that's a real musician, the one that don't really hang around
he just
about the
throws
gear.
it, yeah.
They use it as what they are, tools.
Yeah, exactly. So
He's a tool for a job. Full
Yeah.
stop.
what a guy. Love him.
Like Wagyu says in the chat, you got to get him on the show.
Yeah.
Well, I would, but and with the greatest respect to the man, he's not. I don't think he would make a good podcast or live stream guest. It's just not his environment. His environment is of a different era, I think.
Yeah,
And
he did it with
in terms of time.
he did Martin Ware's podcast, didn't he? But he did it with Mike. I think it was with Mike.
Yeah, with Mike Painter,
Yeah.
who's the other half of
Yeah, that
of
was
the current
and obviously
iteration.
that worked quite well with the pair of them.
Yeah,
But,
because
yeah.
David clearly exhibits, how should we say, very politely, because I have huge respect for that, mannerisms
Yes, please do.
Akin to a life very well and colourfully lived.
Yes.
There we go.
Wow.
I think that's diplomatic.
Yeah.
And he's an incredibly engaging human and wonderfully accommodating and so generous with his time and everything. But he would... I don't think it would make great viewing. When we did the first podcast, we had to edit. We had just to get the flow. But that was. I got invited to London to go to the Delia Derbyshire Day event at the British Library by Sound on Sound, and it was only when I got there that Sound on Sound, or the guys from Sound on Sound said, "Would you like to come and see David Voorhouse tomorrow at his studio?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course." He said, "While you're there, would you mind interviewing him?" And I'm like, "I've got nothing prepared." So,
Rob,
yeah.
you said that Andy was difficult to stop again. Well, I think it's time to wrap it up for today. It's been a long stream, and my wife probably wants me to help with dinner. So
You've got to train her to be more like Fiona and just let him go.
If only I could.
Too fun. Well, thanks for putting this on, Henrik. I'm glad you
Yeah,
did.
it's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thanks for being here, all of you. It has been a pleasure to do the replacement shows. This was the last one before Ranzee gets back next Saturday. So it will happen again, but it will be later.
But not too soon.
Yeah. So
Thank
thanks
you very much,
everybody.
Eric. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good weekend.
See you later.
Cheers.
Everyone. Cheers.
Oh, that was the wrong one. This one.